Remember, we'll post these to our website if you're not here at 9 o'clock to watch these, or if you want to go back and watch any of the other ones. Again, this is Rules Monday with the Colorado Golf Association. My name is Robert Duke. I'm the Director of Rules and Competitions for the CGA. This is kind of a supplement to our education program. We usually do these in person, and we do a 2 or 4 hour seminar just on a broad cover of the rules. But each week we've been doing one rule at a time and really diving deep into each rule. So it's been pretty fun and had a good response to it, I think. So again, thanks everyone for coming out. As you can see today, we are on Rule 16, which is abnormal course conditions, a little bit of embedded ball as well, some dangerous animal condition, and picking your ball up to see if relief is entitled. So the main part of this is going to be abnormal course conditions. So this is a big one. We've got a lot to cover on this one, so we'll go ahead and get started on it. All right, so in Rule 16 here, we have relief from the abnormal course condition, which is including immovable obstructions, dangerous animal conditions, and embedded ball. And it's broken down into 4 subsections. We have 16.1, which is the abnormal course conditions, including immovable obstructions. We've got 16.2, dangerous animal condition. Doesn't happen a lot, hopefully, but rules do contemplate that. 16.3, embedded ball. This one, fairly common. You know, we had a lot of questions about this with Patrick Reed a month or 2 ago when his ball embedded at Torrey Pines, and this one came to the spotlight as it usually does when it happens on a tour. And we have 16.4, which is lifting the ball to see if it lies in a condition where relief is allowed. So while we have 4 sections to this rule, probably 75% or more of the time is going to be spent on 16.1, the abnormal course conditions, including the immovable obstructions. We'll get well into what that means and break that down. But most of it's going to be spent right there in that 16.1 part. 16.2, 3, and 4 are important, obviously, and they happen. The dangerous animal condition I've actually never had happen at an event, which is good, but it does happen, I know, but you really don't see it that much. A lot of times you'll see it, more again on a tour where you're playing at the Zurich Classic maybe, and they've got alligators there. They usually do a pretty good job of kind of corralling them. But anyways, we'll cover that. Again, when we start off with the rules, the best thing to do, I think, is to start off and just read the purpose statement for the rule. Again, this is a broad overview of what this rule, the entirety of Rule 16, is about. Again, there's nothing rulemaking in this necessarily, but it does give you kind of a ethos of the rule. And we'll look here at Rule 16. It says the purpose of the rule. It says Rule 16 covers when and how the player may take free relief by playing a ball from a different place, such as when there's interference from an abnormal course condition or a dangerous animal condition. So here it's inferring, yeah, sometimes you don't play the ball as it lies and you're entitled to relief. And it says these conditions are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course, and free relief is generally allowed except in a penalty area. So there it's saying, okay, of the 5 areas of the course, one of them, the penalty area, that is not applicable. The other 4 it is. It says the player normally takes relief by dropping a ball in a relief area based on the nearest point of complete relief. And then this rule also covers free relief from when a player's ball is embedded in its own pitch mark in the general area. So that's that last one's a really good summary of 16.3. Obviously there's more to it, but that's a good one sentence. It's embedded in its own pitch mark in the general area. There's obviously a little more detail we're going to cover there. And then in here, just to point out, it says these conditions are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course. A lot of times, there'll be a fence or a wall, and that's an immovable obstruction, but based on just the layout of the hole or maybe how the course was designed, the committee would say this wall actually is a challenge of playing the course, in which case they would label it an integral object. So there's the course that I grew up playing in Tennessee, and there's this old stone wall going right through the middle of one of the holes. Well, that stone wall's been there for 200 years, 300 years, and it's an integral part of the course. So if you're up against it, you don't get free relief. So here they're kind of nodding to say, these are not just part of the challenge. However, a committee could make an immovable obstruction an integral object, and we don't really cover that today. But this is just kind of something to point out here, that not all artificial objects are treated as obstructions. We're going to see that integral objects and boundary objects are very separate from this, in which case there is no relief. They're treated very similarly in that you have to navigate around them, but these are not considered, a cart path next to the putting green is not considered a challenge of playing the course. You're allowed relief from that. You can take relief from that. So let's look at 16.1. It says abnormal course conditions, and it says including immovable obstructions. And I'm not sure why. I've always kind of thought this was funny, because an abnormal course condition, as we're going to see, is a ground under repair, animal hole, immovable obstruction, and temporary water. So it's like saying, yeah, there's a BLT including bacon. It's like, yeah, it's in the name. And immovable obstruction is in the abnormal course condition. So they're kind of mentioning it twice. Abnormal course, I don't know why it's repetitive unless it's just to draw attention to it, which might be why. But the immovable obstruction, as we'll see, is included in an abnormal course condition. So let's go ahead and look at, well, what is an abnormal course condition? And we're going to just right out of the gate, before we get into the rule, we're going to spend some time in the definitions here and see what this actually is. Because again, the rule says here's what they are, but we're going to look at it a little bit deeper in the definition and really get into what each abnormal course condition is. And an abnormal course condition is any of these four defined conditions. It's an animal hole, it's a ground under repair, it's immovable obstruction, and it's temporary water. So all of these four things are kind of, they're kind of collected as an abnormal course condition. So if you see, immovable obstruction, that's an abnormal course condition. So again, I don't know why it says abnormal course conditions, including immovable obstructions. That's already in the category of abnormal course conditions. Again, it's like a BLT including bacon. Like, yeah, it's part of the whole thing as in the name. So I'm not sure why they do that, again, unless it's to draw attention to it. Anyways, looking here, let's look at the first one, animal hole. Each of these conditions has its own definition. So we're going to look at those real quick. An animal hole is any hole dug in the ground by an animal, except for holes that are dug by animals that are also defined as a loose impediment, such as a worm or insect. The term animal hole includes the loose material the animal dug out of the hole, any worn down track or trail leading into the hole, and any area on the ground pushed up or altered as a result of the animal digging the hole underground. So essentially, this is anything the animal did to build the hole or create the hole, any dirt or surface of the earth that's been altered by an animal creating a habitat or a hole. And it's not even a habitat. It could be a dog. It used to say a burrowing animal. And then, okay, well, what is that? And then there's another definition for burrowing animal. Here it's any animal except for holes dug by animals that are considered loose impediments. So again, here it's anything that might be part of that, the dirt that was extracted maybe, or anything around there. And then we can see in italicized here, okay, there's animal hole. Well, what is an animal? Like I said, it used to be burrowing animal, and now they've really opened it up in a good way to say what an animal is. So let's look at what an animal is. So that helps us know what an animal hole is. And it's a lot more simple than it had been. Again, it was burrowing animal. Now it's just animal, which is any living member of the animal kingdom other than humans, including mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates such as worms, insects, spiders, and crustaceans. So while anything other than a human is considered an animal, again, going back to the definition here, an animal hole is any hole dug by an animal except those loose impediments. So those loose impediment animals, those worms, yes, they are animals, but they are not considered to be created animal holes. You could probably see how problematic that would be. Those in the morning, get those worm casts, and if every little thing a worm did was considered an animal hole, a lot of holes would be not unplayable, but you could get relief anywhere you wanted. So it excludes those things made by insects and things that are considered loose impediments. So just a point of clarification there. So ground under repair is our next defined term, and that is simply any part of the course the committee defines to be ground under repair, whether by marking it or otherwise. And when it says or otherwise, that means by definition. They could say they're not going to mark a decorative flower bed right by the clubhouse. They're not going to put white paint down there. Certainly, they're just going to say, and what we do on the CGA's hard card is any decorative flower bed is treated as ground under repair with mandatory relief. If you played from there, it'd be a wrong place. So the committee can define it simply by wording to say, yeah, we're not going to go paint every single flower bed, but we can define it on the local rules as such. It's kind of an interesting definition, and it's a little confusing, I think, because it says, well, ground under repair is any part of the course the committee says is ground under repair. So it's using its own, the definition of it's using its own word to say what it is. Well, ground under repair is ground under repair. A little hard to, explain that, but the rules do a good job toward the back of the book when it says what should an area, what the committee should decide to be an area of ground under repair. It says in general, when ground conditions are abnormal to the course or it's unreasonable to require a player to play from a specific area, it should be marked as GUR. So here, GUR is not really defined, I think, that well in the definitions because all it says is GUR is GUR. And there's some other things that it gets into that we'll look at. But in the committee procedures, when the rules are saying, hey, to the committee, here's when you should mark GUR, that's a better, I think, explanation of it. And as a player, you don't really have to worry about what is or is not marked as GUR. If it's not marked as GUR or doesn't fit into the definition like we're about to see, then it's not GUR and you really don't have to worry about it. But this is more of a committee guidance right here. But again, getting back to the definition, again, it's a little, hard to define using the same word to define the word already. GUR is GUR. Well, yes. It also goes on to say, any defined ground under repair includes both all the ground inside the edge of the defined area. So if there's a white line on the ground or a white circle around a tire rut, all of that is inside the GUR, ground under repair. And it says any grass, bush, tree, or other growing or attached natural object rooted in that defined area that was maybe painted white, including any part of these objects that extends up above the ground outside the edge of the defined area, but not when such object is attached to or below the ground outside the edge of the defined area, such as a tree root that is part of a tree rooted inside the edge. So if there's an area of ground under repair and there's a tree inside of it, even if the tree goes over the edge of the ground under repair, since it is rooted in there, that overhanging tree would be considered ground under repair. So very technically, if you had interference from a tree branch and you're outside the ground under repair, but the tree that rooted is inside the ground under repair is growing over it, you could technically get relief from that tree because it says any grass, bush, or tree rooted in the defined area, including any part of those objects, so a branch that extends up above the ground and outside the edge. So kind of a strange concept, but it doesn't happen that much, so really nothing to worry about. But it also says, okay, in that way, if the tree grows outside of it, that's GUR. But if a root on the ground goes outside of it, just around the GUR, then that's not part of the ground under repair. So very important to know that. Again, really does not happen all that much, but just a point of clarification here. Goes on to say, ground under repair also includes the following things, even if the committee does not define them as such. So if the committee misses something or something just happens, let's say overnight of a competition, the rules still kind of bundle that into what I almost consider like a natural ground under repair. Nobody has to do anything for these to be ground under repair. They're just automatically ground under repair. The committee doesn't have to define them or pay attention. So if they crop up naturally, which you see they might in some of these examples, then the committee's not going to be, penalizing a player for not marking something correctly. It's already defined in the status here. So it says, first off, the first bullet point, it's divided into 3 or 4 bullet points. It says any hole made by the committee or maintenance staff, so the grounds crew, and setting up the course, such as the hole where a stake has been removed, or the hole of a double green being used for the play of another hole. So you see this at maybe St. Andrews, right, where there's double green and then one hole is on the other. If you were to hit it into the other cup or the other hole on a shared green, that's, again, very technically GUR. That could get into another situation where the green could be defined as 2 separate ones. We don't really get into that. The second part is maintaining the course, such as a hole made in removing turf or a tree stump or laying pipelines, but not including aeration holes. So it says, if there's workers that are, fixing a sprinkler line and say they leave for lunch and their work is still there and you hit, that's a hole made by maintaining the course. When you have aeration holes, that's just a general condition of the course in the same way you can't repair those like we saw in Rule 13 on the putting green because it's the natural condition of the green. So is it the natural condition of the course? Maybe your ball is in the general area. That being said, there is a local rule that the committee could introduce to give relief from aeration holes. Something here at the CGA we look at certainly this time of year, early in the spring, if courses are aerating, which is something they need to do early in the spring, and we have an event there. If we notice aeration holes, we'll put that local rule in to accommodate that. But otherwise, aeration holes on its own, very specifically, are not part of ground under repair. Grass cuttings, leaves, and other material piled for later removal. That's the key phrase here. It's not just grass clippings that are just scattered randomly. It's if they are piled for later removal. So an intentional act to take the grass clippings here, pile them here. It could be leaves or other material, branches, whatever. The superintendent pile them over to say, I'm going to remove these. If you hit them in there, that would technically be ground under repair. The committee doesn't have to mark that. It says, but these natural materials that are piled for removal are also loose impediments, so you can simply move them out of the way, or any materials left on the course that are not intended to be removed are not ground under repair unless the committee has defined them as such. So again, if they're just scattered out there, that's not covered by this definition here. And it says any animal habitat, such as a bird's nest, I've not had this happen, but it's covered here, that is so near a player's ball that the player's stroke or stance might damage it, except, and we see this again, like we saw with animal holes, excluding the loose impediments. It says, except when the habitat has been made by animals that are defined as loose impediments, such as worms or insects. So we see in two definitions within the context of an abnormal course condition, an animal hole and ground under repair, the rules go out of the way to say a loose impediment animal hole is not free relief. Therefore, a loose impediment is not ground under repair. A habitat or whatever, that's also a loose impediment. So a worm cast or anything, I don't know where worms live, up in the ground. Those are loose impediments. They're not ground under repair, even if it's their habitat. And then it goes on to say, so more thing, we're not going to get into that, but really wanted to focus on that last part right here about the loose impediments. So the third one is an immovable obstruction. That's the third thing. Again, it says including immovable obstructions, and it includes it right in the definition. Again, not quite sure why it does that, but for immovable obstructions, we can kind of focus on the keyword of obstruction before we get into that. So like we talked about last week with movable obstructions, now we're to rule 16 where we go immovable obstructions. And before we get to that, we want to look at what an obstruction is before we get to movable versus immovable. An obstruction, and that's just the blanket term for anything artificial, really, is any artificial object except for integral objects and boundary objects, like I had mentioned earlier. Those are not obstructions. In the definition for integral object and the definition for boundary object, it will also say the same thing. It'll say integral objects are not obstructions or boundary objects. When you look at boundary objects, it says boundary objects are not integral objects or obstructions. Each thing is siloed in its own separate area. Obstructions are very different. Integral objects and boundary objects are pretty close together, as in how you operate around them. There's no free relief for either of them, and you can't move them. So pretty similar. The boundary objects are maybe a little more important because they show the defined edge of the course, and this is in, this is out. So anyways, obstruction is either movable or an immovable obstruction. So either you can move it or you can't. Pretty easy. If part of the movable obstruction, such as a gate, door, or part of an attached cable, meets the definition of movable obstruction, that part is treated as movable obstruction. So again, the key here is it's any artificial object. You know, we talked about loose impediments last week too. We don't need to go back into that, but again, an obstruction is any artificial object except for the integral objects or boundary objects. And again, the way to look at it is you have obstructions and they are either movable or immovable based on if you can or cannot move them. And that's covered by movable obstructions, rule 15.2, immovable right here in rule 16.1. So we're focusing today on the immovable obstruction, those obstructions that cannot be moved easily, which we see here in the definition. So now that we've got our obstruction, we're going to look at the immovable part of it, which says any obstruction, so any artificial object that, other than integral objects and boundary objects, cannot be moved without unreasonable effort or without damaging the obstruction or the course, and otherwise does not meet the definition of a movable obstruction. So that's a good way to look at it, is if you can't categorize it as a movable obstruction, then it's an immovable obstruction. And the same goes the other way. Sometimes there's varying statuses of things. You know, if there's a park bench, right, and someone can move it, but you can't, well, for you, that's an immovable obstruction because you can't move that, but somebody else, maybe they could. And that's a little different, but again, it's one or the other. If you can move it. If you can't, you can't, with these stipulations here. Says the committee may define any obstruction to be immovable, even if it meets the definition of movable. Doesn't happen all that much, but here it says you can do that. And here's just an example of some obstructions. Again, any artificial object except for the integral object or boundary object. And here are some examples. The first 4 bullet points are movable, really, and the last 3 are immovable, or sorry, movable. The first 4 are immovable, last 3 are movable. So examples: artificially surfaced roads or paths. Those fit immovable because you can't easily move an artificially surfaced road or path, or their borders. You cannot move a building or rain shelter, and you certainly can't move sprinkler heads, drains, irrigation, or control boxes. Those are fixed. Those are immovable. And then stakes, walls, railings, and fences, again, it says not when they're boundary objects that define or show the boundary edge of the course. So even if there's a white line on the ground and there's a boundary object right there, that is showing the boundary edge of the course, still a boundary object. Always, that white stake's always going to be a boundary object, unless the committee puts in a certain local rule, which really never happens. It doesn't need to happen. But again, here's some examples of obstructions here. It says stakes, that could be a penalty area stake. Typically, those are going to be movable. If you have a red stake near your ball, you can move that, unless you can't, because sometimes those stakes are cemented into the ground, in which case they might be immovable obstructions because you can't move those. So, a little fluid here, but again, typically it fits nicely into either you can or you can't move it. That's movable versus immovable. The last definition of abnormal course condition is temporary water. This used to be called casual water, which I always like the term for that, casual water. It's not serious, it's just casual. And now it's just temporary water, which is a good change. So temporary water is defined as any temporary accumulation of water on the surface of the ground, such as puddles from rain or irrigation, or an overflow from a body of water that is not in a penalty area. You could see how problematic that it would be if there was standing water in a penalty area. Well, most of the time there is standing water in a penalty area. That's why it's a penalty area. So you can see obviously where a player could get to a situation where they could try to get out of a penalty area because, it's temporary water. No, it's water in a penalty area that covers that. And that's common sense, I think, to add that in there. So that's pretty, I think that fits nicely and easy to remember. And it can be seen before or after the player takes a stance. And this says without pressing down excessively with his or her feet. And it goes on to add to that. It says it is not enough for the ground to merely be wet, which happens, muddy or soft, or for the water to be momentarily visible as the player steps on the ground. An accumulation of water must remain present either before or after the stance is taken. So here, in temporary water can be kind of a gray area sometimes, but really you just want to boil it down to as simple as you can get it. And it's an accumulation of water. So it's not, exactly a quarter of an inch or a half inch or an inch, or it has to be this much above your shoes, or it's an accumulation of water. And that might be different for every person. If you have someone who weighs half of what another person weighs, let's say it's 125 to 250, the person who's, let's say, 250, they're going to weigh more. That might force more water out of the ground, and they might be in a situation where they would get temporary water relief because when they stand there, the water comes up more, and there is an accumulation where the person who's half their weight, their weight might not be pushing into the ground so much. So that's why if you're officiating, when you give relief or attempting to look at giving relief for temporary water, it's important to have the players stand there and do that and make sure, because for some players it might, and for some players it might not. That's a very, very thin line, and it's kind of nitpicky, but it's something to think about. So it's an accumulation of water, and it must remain present. And a lot of times you'll see players who are very much trying to get temporary water relief because there's mud on their ball, let's say, or whatever, and they're really going to be pressing down with their feet. And it says that in this area before that, it says it is not enough for ground to be merely wet, muddy, soft, or for the water to be momentarily visible as the player steps, forces, and puts more force on the ground. The water must remain present either before or after. So if they're just standing there and letting normal gravity take hold of them and pushing into the ground, what kind of water is going up? Again, it's a little gray. So you kind of have to be there to see it, because if someone calls and says, "Hey, I think I've got temporary water," it's like, well, you might think you do, but you might not, as according to the rules here. So again, something to kind of think about there. Goes on to say special cases, dew and frost are not temporary water. Snow and natural ice, other than frost, which we covered a second ago, are either loose impediments or, when on the ground, temporary water at the player's option. So here it's kind of interesting. Snow, if you've got snow on the ground, you could say, well, it's temporary water, or you could just move it and treat it as a loose impediment. Remember, if you move the snow and your ball moves, you're going to have to put it back into penalty stroke, but you can treat it as either. So it might be more advantageous. Let's say your ball's not in a patch of snow, but there's a little bit right behind your ball. You can move that out of the way or flip it out of the way with your club, because it is treated as a loose impediment, which you can move, obviously in the general area. And then the last one is manufactured ice is an obstruction. Remember, an obstruction is any artificial object, and more to the point, typically it's going to be a movable obstruction. What we see on that is someone got a Coke at the turn with a cup of ice, and they finished it, and then they've just thrown it out, and there's just this pile of scattered, very obvious manufactured ice. So in that regard, it would be a movable obstruction just based on the definition. Because when you think about it, it is, even though it's natural, it's made of water, manufactured ice in the name itself there is man-made. It's manufactured. It's not natural. Those ice cubes do not occur naturally in nature. If you get that like Sonic style ice, that really crushed ice, that's not natural. That's very specialized. So we see that a lot off to the side sometimes in the summer. It melts quickly, obviously, but it just yields to say that's an obstruction, an immovable obstruction. So those are our four terms that each have their own definition that encompass what is an abnormal course condition. So now that we know those four things, and when we read the rule, when it says interference by an abnormal course condition, it's saying any of these four things: interference by an animal, interference by GUR, movable obstruction, temporary water, fits in here. So let's look into the rule itself here. And it starts off with saying this rule covers free relief, so free, not penalized here, that is allowed from interference by what we just covered: animal holes, ground under repair, immovable obstructions, and temporary water. Again, those are all italicized, and we just saw all those definitions, so we've covered those. These are collectively called abnormal course conditions, but each has a separate definition, which we covered. It says this rule does not give relief from movable obstructions. A different type of free relief is allowed via 15.2a, which we covered last week. Or again, it's singling out boundary objects or integral objects where no free relief is allowed. So those are kind of always kind of gang together there because they're very, very similar. There's a few minor differences, but they're very similar to how you treat them and how you play them. Again, the easiest thing to say is there's no free relief allowed. You're playing around those or taking penalty relief if you have interference from those. So before we get going, I just want to start when we, because this is a question we get a lot is, well, if I have interference from a sprinkler head in the rough, don't I also have to drop in the rough? And the answer is not necessarily, because the rules are saying you need to drop that. If it's in the general area, the relief area, which we'll cover, must also be in the general area. And as we saw, throughout all these talks, is the general area does not necessarily take into consideration height of mow. So if you've got fairway and rough, that's both general area. The rules don't care unless there's a very specific local rule in for taking relief for preferred lies. Obviously, when we get to the grass height of the putting green, that's the putting green. That's a specific area of the course. But when it comes to general area, again, remember the grass height doesn't really matter at all unless the rules are very specific about saying so. So before we get started, I want to look at the first interpretation we would see in this rule, just to kind of preface this and think about it as we're going on. So it says if a player receives a better lie, area of intended swing or line of play under taking relief under Rule 16.1, this is the player's good fortune. There's nothing in Rule 16.1 that requires him or her to maintain identical conditions after relief is taken from something that is identified in 16.1. For example, kind of like I mentioned, in taking relief from a sprinkler head in the rough, let's say it's a foot in the rough, the player's nearest point of complete relief or relief area, relief area probably, may be located in the fairway. So when we look at that one club length from relief here, again, that's a 43-inch area for me. That's a lot of room. If this results in the player being able to drop the ball in the fairway, this is allowed. This is still the general area. In some situations, the conditions may be less advantageous to the player after relief is taken as compared to the conditions before relief is taken, such as when the nearest point of complete relief or relief area is in an area of rocks. So that, let's say your ball is on a cart path and your nearest point of complete relief, which is what we're going to cover here in a little bit, is to the left of the cart path, and that's all rocky area. Well, that's the way you got to go if that's the general area. So that might be your misfortune, I guess. And sometimes you might be more apt to want to play it just off the cart path and not take relief. So here it's yielding, it doesn't contemplate the kind of lie or kind of area of intended swing or condition affecting the stroke, which would include maybe line of play, that you may or may not have when taking relief. You're allowed relief, and whatever the conditions, wherever the chips may fall, when you've taken that relief, that just is what it is. Like the rules can't get that specific and say, oh, well, it has to be in the rough. It's no, you take relief as prescribed if you want to, and whatever happens, good or bad, is just part of it. And again, we'll look at the correct procedure for that. So when we look at 16.1a, it's when relief is allowed. The meaning of interference by abnormal course conditions. So we're going to look at, well, when it says you have interference from an abnormal course condition, what does interference mean? And it says interference exists when any one of these is true, when the player's ball touches or is in or on an abnormal course condition. So the ball is lying in temporary water. That is certainly interference. An abnormal course condition interferes with the player's area of intended stance or area of intended swing, or only when the ball is in the putting green, an abnormal course condition on or off the putting green interferes with the line of play. So here, to draw attention to it, this is the only time when line of play relief is allowed. We get a lot of questions about, I'm 10 feet behind a sprinkler, irrigation box. It's right in line with the putting green. Do I get relief from that? Well, if you're 10 feet behind it, you don't have any interference as defined here because the ball does not touch it and it does not physically interfere with the player's area of intended stance or swing. It's in your line of play, but the only time line of play matters is, again, the putting green is a very special place, is when your ball's in the putting green. And notice here, it says an abnormal course condition on or off the putting green. So in a very rare situation, you've got a really big putting green that's got a lot of slope to it. Maybe you have to putt into the fringe a little bit. And when you putt into the fringe, there's a sprinkler head there. Even if it's not on the putting green, if your ball is in the putting green, you have to putt through that. You'd have interference and would then be entitled to relief under 16.1D about having interference on the putting green for a ball on the putting green. So again, very specific here. So, and you notice it doesn't say blanket statement a condition affecting the stroke, because a condition affecting the stroke is also including in your line of play and then maybe a relief area. Here, it does not include line of play unless your ball lies in that one specific area of the course, the putting green. If it's in one of the other 4 areas of the course, line of play relief is not a thing. And we'll see a TIO in a minute, which is a boutique rule. But again, only line of play for only the putting green. Anywhere else, you're getting creative, right? You're playing around that sprinkler box 10 feet in front of you. And then it says, if the abnormal course condition is close enough to distract the player, but does not meet any of the above 3 requirements, there's no interference under this rule, and therefore there is no relief. There's no interference. And here it says, if the abnormal course condition is close enough to distract the player, this is the opposite of what we saw last week with the ball interfering with play. If I've got another golf ball from another player right in front of my ball, I could ask the other player to mark and move that golf ball. Here, if you're standing, between, and this happens actually more than you think, is the player's stance is over a sprinkler head maybe, but where their ball is, that their feet, their width, they're just right over top of it. That's not physical. It might be mental interference, but who's to say what is and what is not mental interference? So the rules don't allow for that, because that's way too much air to say, oh, that mental interferes with me. Well, what does that mean? So you have to have actual physical interference. So officiating, what I would say is, is if a player's ball is near a sprinkler head in the fairway, right? I'd say, well, if you made a free and easy swing, and it might be different, right? If they're playing through air and off the course, off the ground rather, they're going to be kind of picking it, right? And if they're 100 yards out, and they're playing a wedge, they might be digging. Especially for some of these higher level players, they're gonna take a big piece of earth out when they hit a wedge. So I would say, if you swung at this ball, do you have any worry at all about hitting that immovable obstruction? Now, if they're 2 feet behind it and they say, oh yeah, then I'd say, well, that's a little much. But once it gets closer, if they're at all worried about pulling up on it and maybe hitting that, then I would say, then yeah, you're going to get relief from that, because it is legitimate. And again, it's not an exact line. It's not 3, 4, 5, 6. How deep is the sprinkler head? Where is it on their follow through maybe? And that's just a way to ask it is, could you make a free and easy swing here without worrying about hitting it? The answer is yeah. Then okay, no relief. But if it's I think I might hit it when I dig in. If it's reasonable, then I would say that is interference and that is relief. So again, no mental interference. This is the opposite of what we saw last week for an intervening ball. And then the last thing says the committee may adopt a local rule denying relief from an abnormal course condition that only interferes the area of intended stance. Doesn't happen that much. We've done it before with animal holes, maybe. Like a lot of moles at Eisenhower Golf Course here in the area. They have some gophers or moles there that we've said, well, it's for live ball only, because if it was stance, a player could be 30 feet off the fairway and get stance relief, work it back to the fairway. So doesn't happen a lot, but the blue text is kind of usually pointing you back to the committee procedures and the model local rules in section 8 here. In the second area here, it says, okay, relief allowed anywhere on the course except in the balls in the penalty area. So if you have interference, well, where do we get relief? Relief says that if you have interference, relief from interference by an abnormal course condition is allowed under Rule 16.1 only when both the abnormal course condition is on the course, so not out of bounds. So if your ball is this far inbounds, that's great, you get to play it. But if you're standing on a sprinkler head that's out of bounds, that's not on the golf course. That's not considered, you might have interference, but you're not given relief from it. The ball is anywhere on the course except in a penalty area. So again, they're isolating any penalty area. So that one specific area of the course, the other four, you would be allowed relief. When you're in a penalty area, that's covered by Rule 17, and there's plenty of relief procedures for a ball in a penalty area, which we'll cover next week. Won't get into that today, but it says here, if your ball is in a penalty area and it's on a sprinkler head, that doesn't matter. You're in a penalty area. You've got to either play it or take penalty area relief, which is going to be penalty 99% of the time. The only other time it's not usually is what we're going to cover today in a dangerous animal condition, which we'll see. And again, this is just to really look at it. This is the ball is anywhere on the course, not the stance, not in your area of intended swing. It's the ball. So if the ball is in the general area and my stance is in a penalty area, but I am standing on an abnormal course condition, again, not temporary water, but maybe a sprinkler head in the penalty area, I would be entitled to relief because my ball is anywhere on the course except the penalty area. It's in the general area. So something to really kind of drill down on right there is where does the ball lie? That's what we're worried about here. So if the ball's in a bunker, then yeah, you still get relief here. So again, where the ball lies, not where your stance is. So that's the key here, is where the ball lies. Very specific on that. And then the last part is there's no relief under Rule 16.1 when it's clearly unreasonable to play the ball. So when playing the ball as it lies would be clearly unreasonable because of something other than an abnormal course condition, such as when a player is standing in temporary water or on an immovable obstruction, but would be unable to make the stroke because of where the ball lies in a bush, or when interference exists only because the player chooses a club, type of stance, or swing or direction of play that is very unreasonable under the circumstances. So in the first part, that could be simply, and we've had this happen where a player is standing on a cart path, but their ball is behind a tree or actually in the roots of a tree, and there's 0% chance they'll be able to make a stroke at the ball because of the roots around it. That would negate them being able to take relief because let's say the cart path didn't exist. And this is a good way to think about it when you're talking maybe with a player trying to apply relief or relief yourself. If the cart path wasn't here, what would I do with the ball? My only logical choice is to take an unplayable because if it lies in those roots, then the obstruction doesn't get you out of jail there. You can't make a stroke anyway, so the obstruction being there is kind of immaterial. So it doesn't happen a lot, and it does depend on the skill of a player because there's sometimes a certain player, how good they are, they can make that stroke. They can maybe hit that shot. But think of maybe Sergio at the behind the tree at Medina when he did the run up the hill. Most players couldn't hit that shot. He could hit that shot. So his ball being behind the tree, maybe if he was standing on an obstruction, he could say, I can play this shot, and maybe an official believes him or doesn't believe him. He played the shot and he played a stroke at it. So anyways, that's different, but it does sometimes depend on the skill of the player. Not all the time, but sometimes it does. And highlighting this is when interference exists only because a player chooses a club, type of stance, swing, or direction of play that is clearly unreasonable under the circumstances. There's an interpretation that's pretty specific on this that's really good in covering this and details a lot more what this means. And it means a player may not use a clearly unreasonable stroke to get relief from an abnormal course condition if the player's stroke is clearly unreasonable given the circumstances. So there's a little bit of gray there. It is subjective. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Relief from Rule 16.1 is not allowed, and he or she must either play the ball as it lies or take unplayable ball relief. And it says, for example, in the general area, a right-handed player's ball is in a bad lie. A nearby immovable obstruction would not interfere with the player's normal right-handed stroke, but would interfere with a left-handed stroke. The player states that he or she is going to make the next stroke left-handed and believes that since the obstruction interferes with such a stroke, 16.1b allows relief. Well, again, if your ball wasn't in a poor lie, there's no reason you'd play it left-handed. The only reason you're playing it left-handed is to get a stance maybe to get relief. So, but there might be, and we don't get into this one, but we might be, there might be a situation where it does require you to play left-handed, right? Because let's say your ball as a right-hander is right up against the boundary fence, and the only way you can play it is to play it as a left-hander because there's a physical fence this far from your ball. You play a lefty, and now you're on a cart path. And I'm not sure why I mentioned that, but there's another interpretation that talks about that specifically that we don't cover because it does get a little complicated. But continuing this one says, however, since the only reason the player for the player to use a left-handed stroke is to escape a bad lie by taking relief, using the left-handed stroke is clearly unreasonable, and the player is not allowed to take relief under 16.1b. So again, if that obstruction wasn't just so happened to be on the left side of the golf ball or the right side of the golf ball, there's no reason the player would play it left-handed. They're only doing it maybe to potentially, get that, stance on the obstruction to, in their mind, oh, now I get relief. Well, this says no, you don't. And it goes on to say the same principles would apply to the use of a clearly unreasonable stance, direction of play, or the choice of club. So it could be, your ball's near the obstruction and your normal stance, you'd be fine. But if you move your foot back 6 inches back or a foot back and say, oh yeah, this isn't my stance, well, that's not how you play the shot. That's not your normal stance. So there's a little bit of integrity here to say, yeah, what's your normal stance like? And if there's interference is interference, you can't take an unreasonable stance. Oh, I'm going to play my ball that way, and now my stance is been altered 90 degrees, and now I'm playing sideways. Well, why are you playing sideways? It's just to get on the obstruction. It's not to actually play the hole. So again, subjective, and this kind of helps clear that up. And then lastly, it says the committee may adopt a local rule for allowing free relief from interference by a temporary immovable obstruction on or off the course. What that is this right here. This is, and Phil is obviously choosing to play it, but technically he would probably have been allowed relief in this situation. He probably looked at it and said, this shot, I have a better chance of holding it in fewer strokes from here than my relief area. And also maybe it's more fun to do it this way. I don't know, but this is kind of a boutique rule. Normal people don't have temporary immovable obstructions and grandstands when you play golf. So this is really not something we need to worry about at all. Again, this is kind of a tour rule for an event like that. All right, so moving on to 16.1b, let's look at how we get relief in the general area for an abnormal course condition. Again, this is isolating the general area. So it's anything that does not fit into one of those 4 specific areas. It's not in the teeing area, not in a bunker, not in a penalty area, not on the putting green. It fits into the general area. So we're going to look at relief for that. This is if a player's ball is in the general area. Again, where the ball lies, not where your stance lies. We're looking at the ball here. The player's ball is in the general area, and there's interference by an abnormal course condition on the course. Again, we're seeing things that we've already seen, on the course. It's inferring here. The player may take free relief by dropping the original ball or another ball in this relief area. So here it's, talking about you can either take the original ball and clean it and drop it, or use another ball. Again, using the same balls when, you have to replace it on a spot. We're obviously not replacing it on the spot, and it yields, it says, okay, see rule 14.3, when it says, okay, you're going to drop the ball. That's a whole other thing we covered 2 weeks ago about how you drop it and the right way to drop it, and those 3 things that follow up with that. So here, and in that rule, it says anytime you're proceeding under 14.3, which we are here, you can use a new ball or another ball, or the same ball rather, each time you may have to drop it or place it under this operation of this rule. So here it's saying you don't have to use the original ball. Most of the time, you're going to use the same one. Another example where you could maybe is if you're in a sprinkler head and you've got a nice new $5 golf ball, and your next shot, it's 220 over water into the wind. You say, I'm going to try it, but I'm not that confident. And you take relief from the sprinkler head. I'm going to drop a lesser ball, let's say a water ball maybe. So if it does go in the water, no harm, no foul. That's fine. You can do that if you're taking relief from an abnormal course condition in the process. You can switch those balls up. The only other time you couldn't is maybe, at a USGA qualifying event. There's the 1 ball rule, which means you have to use the same make and model all the way around. We're not going to cover that, but that's the 1 ball rule shouldn't be in play unless it's a very, very, very high level amateur event or professional event. The CGA for our championships, we don't even use 1 ball rule. So not something we normally need to worry about. Anyways, reference point is the nearest point of complete relief in the general area. So this is, we're establishing our relief procedure here. So the first thing you have to do is establish, where's our reference point? And it's going to unfold and say from the reference point, you get a relief area, and it describes the relief area. So before we get to that, we need to jump into what is the nearest point of complete relief. This is the first time we've really seen it in this rule. It's kind of a long definition. It's italicized, but it's a definition, as we see by it being italicized. So the reference point is the nearest point of complete relief. That's the same thing. The nearest point of complete relief is the reference point. The reference point is the nearest point of complete relief. So those are synonymous. Says the nearest point of complete relief is the definition, is the reference point right there. The first thing it says is the nearest point of complete relief is the reference point. For taking free relief from an abnormal course condition, which we're doing here, dangerous animal condition, which we're going to do, and then wrong green, which we covered in 13, and then no plays in, which we kind of covered a little bit today and a little bit next week, and then or in taking relief under certain local rules, which again, there's a lot of them. So again, it's the reference point. That's the nearest point of complete relief. The nearest point of complete relief is the reference point, as we see here. So again, pulling back in the definition and the rule, same thing, reference point, nearest point of complete relief, nearest point of complete relief, reference point. So same thing. Again, getting back to the definition is the estimated point where the ball would lie. That is, and again, we're estimating where in this situation, we're saying this is where interference, which we're going to see here, won't exist. It is the estimated point nearest to the ball's original spot, but not near the hole in that spot. So it's no closer to the hole. This is a pretty prevailing concept we see in the rules. If you're taking relief from a situation, usually it's always going to preface with, and I say usually, it's probably all the time, you know, it cannot be closer to the hole unless it's something very specific that allows you to, maybe like a drop zone. But anyways, it's in the required area of the course. The reference point, anytime you take relief, it's going to say, you know, in the general area, it has to also be in the general. In a bunker, it has to be in a bunker. On the putting green, it has to be on the putting green or the general area. So the rule, whatever you're operating under, it's going to tell you which area of the course it needs to be in, or it's going to say it doesn't matter when you take relief from the penalty area. And there's no nearest point of complete relief reference there, but when you take relief, the relief area can be in any area of the course, doesn't specify. But for the nearest point of complete relief, the rule is going to specify what area of the course it can be in. And it says where the condition does not interfere with the stroke the player would have made for the original spot if the condition was not there. So what you're doing is estimating, and kind of like I said earlier, in a backwards way in how you give relief, to say, where would your ball lie that the closest spot, not near the hole in the area, required area of the course, where's the closest spot that your ball could lie where you could swing free and clear of whatever the obstruction in question is, sprinkler head, sprinkler box, cart path, whatever, and you have to get your stance and swing and live ball off that condition. Where's the nearest spot the ball would lie to get that? And when we look at it, we see the word stroke here, and we're going to dive into that. Again, that's an italicized word. That is a definition. So it says, let's see what stroke says. Stroke says a stroke is the forward movement of the club to strike the ball. And I'm going to keep reading it just to kind of show you what the fullness of this rule is talking about. It says, but a stroke has not been made if the player decides during the downswing not to strike the ball and avoids doing so by deliberately stopping the club head before it gets to the ball, or if unable to stop, by deliberately missing it, swinging over top of it, accidentally strikes the ball when making a practice swing or while preparing to make a stroke. So you're on the tee, you're swinging, you're warming up there, and you accidentally hit it. You haven't made a stroke at it because it's a deliberate action to hit and move the ball. I read all of this because I think it's a little disjointed here how it connects back to the rule, because what the definition of stroke is really talking about is the forward movement of the club and the intent. When you look at the interpretations under stroke, which we're not going to do because that's a bigger rabbit hole, it goes into, where the club had separated from the shaft and the backswing and you didn't bring the club forward. It's talking about an intent to strike and move the ball. So when we look at it in the context of nearest point of complete relief, look at it read it like this, as where the condition does not interfere with, and let's interject the definition, does not interfere with the forward movement of the club made to strike the ball. The player. So in that vein, I don't think it makes that much sense. I think it would sound a little better if it said where the condition does not interfere with the area of intended swing or live ball that player would have had maybe from the original spot if the condition was not there. I think we get where it's coming from, but when you plug it into the actual rule here, where the condition does not interfere with the forward movement of the club made to strike the ball. Well, we know when we establish our nearest point of complete relief that we're looking at, it's the point where the ball would lie. That is where the condition does not interfere with the stroke. So we're looking at where the ball would to get all of our action area from making a stroke off the condition in question. So if our stance would be on as a right-hander, which we'll see in a minute, is on a cart path, the nearest point of complete relief is the point where the ball would lie, where our stance is no longer on the cart path. So here's a good picture in the rules. If we're looking at B1, direction of play is going up. If we go to the left, our stance as a right-hander, right, is off the cart path. We have free and clear relief. If we're going to B2, our ball lies there. We kind of have our ghost footprints there, right? To get our stance and swing off the cart path completely, we got to go way farther out. I say way farther, a couple feet out, to get our live ball in stance. But what the rules say is you have to get the stroke off. Well, that, again, I just don't like the way that fits right here. And I think we get what it means when it says that your stroke, your action area, your golf swing, wherever your golf is taking place, that needs to get off the obstruction in question if you're taking relief, but not your stroke. Your stroke is the forward movement of the club with the intent to strike the ball. Again, it's just something to notice and that I noticed. And again, it's fine. I think it certainly works. But again, I think I'd rather it say, stance or area of intended swing. I think that's a little more clear because again, it's the point where the ball would lie, where the condition does not interfere with, think about it this way, the stance or area of intended swing or lie of ball, which is what this picture really does a good job of showing you. This has nothing to do with the stroke. Nothing here has anything to do with the forward movement of the club. But the way it's connected, again, I think we get it. But that's just kind of a side note that I've always saw and just kind of wanted to think about and talk over right here since we're dissecting it right now. So anyways, this is for a right-handed player. Conversely, and this is in the interpretation for nearest point of complete relief, what if you're left-handed? So here we have B1, again, in the same way but mirrored, you have to get your stance and swing off the obstruction in question. So your reference point, P1, is the nearest point of complete relief. That has to be way off the cart path. In B2 for a left-hander, you don't have to go that far because at this point for a lefty at P2, nearest point of complete relief 2, think of it as it is, that's where your stance and swing is off the cart path or the abnormal course condition in question here. Again, nothing to do with the forward movement of the club or the stroke. It's live ball and area of intended stance and swing. Again, line of play we don't contemplate. So I have to head over the cart path. Obviously, that's not contemplated here. So, anyways, short detour there. But getting back to the rule, it is again estimating this reference point requires the player to identify the choice of club, stance, swing, and line of play he or she would have used to make that stroke. So going back to this slide, if you're 150 yards from the hole, when you establish, how far off the cart path, and let's say it's a wedge, say it's 100 yards from the hole, that area where your ball would lie to where your stance is obviously much, much closer to say if you had 250 and you got to hit a 3-wood now. So that would give you a little more room because that's farther away from your feet. So you get a little bit into the mechanics of the swing here when it says, the rules say you should or require the player to identify what kind of club you're playing. So if you're 100 yards off the green and you take your relief and you pull a 3-wood out and you're not having to do a punch shot or anything, and it's just, oh yeah, this is what I would use normally to try to get more space off. Well, that's not correct because you wouldn't use a 3-wood from 100 yards typically. And some people do, and maybe you do, and that's fine. But again, if we're officiating, maybe, say a player hits a wedge, that 100-yard wedge is not, you're not using a 3-wood in that case to get off it. You're using, what would you normally play in this situation? And if it's a punch shot because you're a lot of trees, maybe a 3-wood is appropriate. Or maybe a player does hit their 3-wood 100 yards and that's their club. That's fine, but the rules are saying, what club would you use if this obstruction in question or abnormal course condition was not here? And that's what it infers here. What club would you have used, stance, swing, line of play for the stroke if that, I'd say ACC, abnormal course condition, were not there? And then lastly, it says the player does not need to simulate that stroke by taking an actual stance and swinging the club, but it is recommended the player normally do this to help in making an accurate estimate. So again, it's showing your work. We look at relief areas, we look at using tees maybe to show your work here, kind of doing the same thing. But again, if I'm 100 yards off the green and I would use a wedge. I don't need to exactly get there and use my wedge because it's pretty obvious for me that I would do that. But again, to do it to show your work, it says you should do it. It doesn't say you must. It says or recommended you do it. So just to get a more accurate representation. But again, you don't have to always do that. We'll see that later when we take relief area. And you don't have to always put the tees in the ground and measure your one club length, because if I drop it this far from the relief area reference point in the relief area, it's very obviously not more than one club length, which we'll get into in a minute. It says the nearest point of complete relief relates solely to the particular condition in question from which relief is being taken and may be located where there's interference from something else. So I'm taking relief from a cart path, but I'm taking relief from that cart path. Anything else I'm not worried about, as long as I'm taking relief for the reference point and the relief area. In the general area, I take relief from the cart path, and my relief area maybe is in an area of a puddle, a temporary water. I don't get to do double relief. Say, oh, well, I would have dropped it in that. So you got to take relief from that relief, from that interference rather, drop it. Now we have a new situation. Maybe you want to play the ball out of the water. Totally fine. You take relief from one condition at a time. There could be an instance where you maybe ping pong because there's two. We don't really get into that, but again, you're taking relief from the obstruction or abnormal course condition in question here. If the player takes relief and then has interference by another condition, so I guess we do get into the ping pong here, from which relief is allowed, the player may take relief by determining a new nearest point of relief for that new condition. So you've dropped the ball, ball's in play, new situation, we've got temporary water, take relief from the temporary water. It says relief must be taken separately for each condition. So cart path once, temporary water next, except a player may take relief from both conditions at the same time based on determining the nearest point of complete relief from both. When having already taken relief separately from each condition, it becomes reasonable to conclude that continuing to do so result in continued interference by one or the other. This is that ping-ponging effect where I take relief from the cart path, temporary water. Whatever the layout and the kind of the feng shui of that temporary water is, would put me back on the cart path, and I can see this as a repeating pattern. Once I've done it once, cart path, done it once, temporary water, once we see this pattern evolving, then I can say, this is one abnormal course condition. I'm taking relief from both, wherever that may be, once we've established, well, you have to do it once on object A, once on object B, once we see the pattern emerging. Okay, now we can do both, but you have to do each separately first. All right. Back to this rule, we just went over the nearest point of complete relief is the reference point. The reference point is the nearest point of complete relief. In this case, in the general area, size of the relief area measured from the reference point. So anytime we have a relief situation where we're dropping a ball, we're always going to have a reference point and then a relief area. In this case, it is one club length, but with these limits. Okay, remember, club length is italicized here. So that's a definition. The club length is the length of the longest club of the 14 or fewer clubs the player has during the round, other than a putter. So while you can still use the tall putter but not anchor it, you can't use that as a measurement for your relief area when establishing one here, or maybe your teeing area. You get two club lengths. Your club length. So 99% of the time, it's going to be your driver. If you don't carry a driver, then it's your longest club. So for me, my driver is 43 inches. Every time I take relief, when it says relief area, to me, I should read the size of the relief area measured from the reference point for Robert, 43 inches, but with these limits. And then again, the rules do a good job of, here's a picture, right? So they have the relief area there, and we're not going to get into the procedure, but just again, reference point, that little spot on the ground, and then we got a little club length there. That's one club length from there, and it's a really good illustration of, it's a pretty wide area. So if that's my reference point, my relief area for taking relief from a little tiny sprinkler head, it's a lot of room. Okay, back to the rule here. Again, the one club length, the limits on the location of the relief area. So the relief area must be in the general area. And here, let's look at this rule. And this is, I think, a good way to remember all this. When your ball is in the relief area, so the player's ball is in the general area, the player's ball is in the general area, the reference point must be in the general area, and the relief area must be in the general area. So when you take relief for ball in the general area, everything you do here must be in the general area when it comes to reference point and relief area. Now, if you're doing this and you might be standing, let's say, in a penalty area when you're taking relief, again, we're looking at the nearest point of complete relief, which is where the ball would lie. So the ball must be in the general area, and the ball where it must land and come to relief, rest in, is in the general area, that relief area. So if your stance is in a penalty area, we don't include that here, but your ball, the nearest point of complete relief, the reference point where the ball would lie, if there is no interference from the condition, the closest spot, no closer to the hole, and the relief area where you drop it in must all take place in the general area. So we see that kind of that vein run through of balls in the general area. So therefore your reference point and relief area must be in the general area. So you're keeping it in the same area of the course. I think this is helpful when if you're in a bunker or your stance is in a bunker, but your ball's not, and where's my relief area? I've had that happen before. And it's helpful to know here. Again, general area runs throughout when your ball is in the general area. Again, it says must not be near the hole in the reference point. That's part of the stipulation of a relief area. And it says, lastly, there must be complete relief from all interference by the abnormal course condition. So in this little third, I don't call it bullet point, but arrow point, the third thing here, that's under limits of the relief area. So we see the reference point up top there, that nearest point of complete relief. We talked about that. That must be in the nearest point of complete relief, no closer to the hole, where interference no longer exists from the abnormal course condition in question. And the relief area mirrors that. It says when you drop the ball in the relief area, there also must be complete relief from interference from the abnormal course condition, which is what we see here, right? So it mirrors that. So your reference point and your relief area, in picking those out, in any case, there must be free relief and complete relief from the obstruction in question. I wish the reference point said that a little better. It compiles that all into the definition of nearest point of complete relief, whereas relief area, it simply states it. There must be complete relief from interference. That's what the nearest point of complete relief is in a very micro area of the spot where your reference point is. The relief area, a much bigger area in this case, one club length from that spot, there has to be complete relief. So it mirrors that. Again, we look at, from all interference. Well, what is interference? It's not italicized, but going back to when we started this rule in 16.1A1, it says interference is when any of these is true. The player's ball is touching the abnormal course condition. It interferes the player's area of intended stance or swing, and on the putting green. So again, it's isolating your action area where the ball would lie, where your stance might be, and where your swing might be. That is considered interference. So going back to that, again, these mirror each other. There must be complete relief from all interference by the abnormal course condition. So there must be complete relief from all interference for your live ball stance, your area of intended swing. It says that for the relief area. In the nearest point of complete relief, we don't go back into it, but it says in there, it's the nearest point where there is no interference, or where the spot of the ball would lie, where there is no interference from the obstruction in question. So they mirror each other in different ways. I mean, they're not worded the same, but when we take it apart like we did, we see that both the reference point and the relief area must avoid interference from the obstruction in question. So roundabout way to look at it, but it's there. All right, so and we kind of shift to, let's look at 14.7 right quick, and this kind of gives more, I think, understanding behind this concept of ball in the wrong place if club strikes conditions relief was taken from. So I take relief from a cart path, but I don't do it right. I drop the ball in the relief area, or probably the incorrect relief area, where I would still hit the cart path. Well, I didn't take free complete relief from the cart path because my club ends up hitting it. So I did not take complete relief from any perceived interference prior to dropping it and putting it in play. And then after I put it in play, I certainly didn't have complete relief because I hit the cart path here. So it says, and this is in 14.7, which is wrong place, but it's got a good link to 16.1, which we're looking at now. It says when a player is taking relief from interference by an abnormal course condition, he or she is required to take relief from all interference from that condition. If the ball is dropped at a spot or comes to rest in a spot where the player has any type of interference from that condition, the ball is in the wrong place, meaning it's outside the relief area. Because if it was inside the relief area correctly, it would avoid all interference from stance, live ball, area of intended swing. So if it doesn't avoid interference, therefore it's outside the relief area, therefore it is in a wrong place technically. Again, here it highlights all interference from that condition. It's kind of referencing all the stuff we just talked about in 16.1. It's kind of compiling right in that little pop right there of the end of that sentence. And it says, for example, a player's ball comes to rest on a cart path and the player decides to take relief. He or she estimates the nearest point of complete relief using that club, like we said, or using that same club that we would have played from, that would have been used to play the ball from the cart path. Having measured the relief area from that point, the player drops the ball and the ball comes to rest in the relief area and makes a stroke, hitting the cart path during the stroke. Because the cart path was in the player's area of intended swing, the player still had interference. Therefore, he or she did not properly determine the relief area and gets the general penalty for playing from the wrong place. So in this paragraph, it is saying, oh, the player dropped it in the relief area. Well, the way to maybe look at it better is to say in the perceived relief area, like, oh, this is going to be fine. I'll drop it here in the relief area that I've measured from. But sometimes the relief area, like we looked at that half moon, a little slice there, sometimes it's not a perfect, area like that. Sometimes it might, if the cart path wiggles out a little bit, so to your relief area would kind of wiggle out. And again, it has to avoid all interference. So while the pictures are nice and clean, as we know, sometimes the angle and the line of attack maybe and the way the cart path is shaped or the GUR certainly is shaped. Sometimes GUR is kind of shaped like an amoeba around the, ground under repair area or an animal maybe. So you have to get free and clear relief from that. So that is, again, adding more insight to the scope of what we're looking at here. So anyways, moving to a ball in a bunker, we still get relief for an abnormal course condition in a bunker. Remember, the only area of the course, so we're at a specific area of the course here in 16.1c, the only area of the course where this is not applicable is when the ball lies in the penalty area. So again, balls in a bunker, we still get relief here. There are some stipulations, obviously. It says if a player's ball is in a bunker and there is interference by an abnormal course condition on the course, the player may take free relief under 1 or penalty relief under 2. So it says the player may take relief. You don't have to. In any of these cases, if you want to play the ball off cart path, totally fine. The only time where you wouldn't, which we'll get into later in the rules, if it was an abnormal course condition that's also defined as a no play zone. Think very nice and pretty decorative flower beds near or around a clubhouse or a green or a teeing area maybe, where it would be required. That's a no play zone. So again, it's saying it's on the course. So if your ball is in a bunker, again, it's highlighting if a player's ball is in a bunker. So if your ball is, just to pivot real quick, if your ball is in the general area, but your stance is in the bunker, you're operating under 16.1b, which we just saw about relief for ball in the general area, not for a ball in the bunker. Very important where your ball lies. And it yields here. It says take free relief under 1, okay, or penalty relief under 2. So there's 2 different types of relief. They're very different. One is free and one is for penalty. It's not required either way. You can have your choice. If you want to take free relief under 1 and it fits and you want to do that, fine. If in the same situation you say I'm just going to get out of the bunker for penalty relief under 2, you can do that. Doesn't matter. It matters really what you want to do and weighing the options of, well, do I take my medicine here? I'm not very good out of bunkers, let's say. So I'm just going to take my relief out of the bunker for 1 penalty stroke because it might take me 2 to get out of here. Take my medicine. I net 1 stroke lower, maybe. Okay, up to you, up to the player. And it's divided into the 2 sections, like we saw. There's free relief and there's penalty relief, playing outside the bunker, and that's a 1-stroke penalty. We're going to cover both of those. So the free relief, very similar to what we just covered, pretty easy. The player may take free relief under Rule 16.1b, except that, again, in the same way we saw that vein of ball in the general area, reference point in the general area, relief area in the general area, the same thing is going to apply to a ball in a bunker, bunker. We're going to see all these things kind of feed through to say where your ball lies, there so must your relief be taken for free in this situation. So the nearest point of complete relief, covered that, and the relief area must be in the bunker. Like we saw, general area, same concept, bunker. If there is no such nearest point of complete relief in the bunker, the player may still take this relief by using the point of maximum available relief in the bunker as the reference point, which is where the maximum available relief, and we don't get into that so much. There doesn't happen that much because typically you're going to be able to have a place to take relief, but maximum available relief is where there's the least amount of interference from the condition in question. Let's say it's temporary water, which is most of the case in a bunker where it interferes with you the less where your reference point is and drop it within a relief area. We're not going to get into that as much here. And then you can take the second area. So that's free relief rather. So all of that, you can take your relief in a bunker We'll see a good picture of that. Again, nearest point of complete relief, +1 club length, no closer to the hole, in the bunker, no penalty. When you do this, you can clean your ball up when you do this, no problem. You can switch out a golf ball if you want, like we saw earlier, no problem. And then the penalty relief in 16.1b or 1C2 says playing from outside the bunker, and this is parentheses back on the line. This is only back on the line. This doesn't include lateral. It's only for the back on the line relief procedure, which we've looked at a little bit along the way through earlier Rules Mondays. Says for one penalty stroke, the player may drop the original ball or another ball. You know, when we're operating under 14.3, we can change out golf balls in a relief area based on the reference line going straight back from the hole to the spot of the original ball. So where it originally, let's say, came to rest in a area of temporary water, a little puddle in the bunker, that spot is establishing a line with the flagstick. Go back as far as you want to go outside the bunker. It's one penalty stroke. So when we do this, the reference point is a point on the course chosen by the player that is on the reference line and is farther from the hole than the original spot, with no limit on how far back on the line. This is inferring that's out of the bunker, and it's that bunker in question. So if you want to do back on the line relief, and we'll see it, and typically it's going to be in the general area, but if you wanted to drop it in another bunker that's not the same bunker, or a penalty area, or even on the putting green, there's a situation where you could do that. That's fine. It's any area of the course. So there's a point on the course. And the only thing it says is that it can't be in the same bunker. In choosing the reference point, the player should indicate this point by using an object, such as a tee. And if the player drops the ball without having chosen this point on the back on the line relief procedure, the reference point is treated as being the point on the line in the same distance from the hole as where the drop ball first touched the ground. So when you're taking relief out, you should identify either mentally, or in this case, saying with the tee, to say, this is my reference point. From this spot, I want one club length, no closer to the hole. Well, this is easier with a picture involved, which we have in a minute. The size of the relief area measured from the reference point is one club length, again, 43 inches for me, but with these limits. So the limits of the relief area, they must not be near the hole in the reference point that I have just established, either mentally or with the tee in the ground, and may be in any area of the course. So it doesn't even say it must be in the same area of the course as the reference point necessarily. It says any area of the course. If more than one area of the course is located within one club length of the reference point, so again, area of the course could be general area bunker, the ball must come to rest in the relief area in the same area of the course the ball first touched and dropped in the relief area. I'm not necessarily, if you drop it in the relief area and it hits in the general area and rolls in a bunker, here it's saying you've got to redrop. You dropped it maybe in the right way, hopefully. And it's saying in this case, you need to drop it again, but it has to land and come to rest in a single area of the course, even if two are inside and bisecting maybe the relief area. So all of this is very easily explained, I think, through a picture here. So situation I set up, we've got flagstick, the ball. A, I can play the ball if I want to. B, I can take my relief area. So again, we see that little picture here where we have the nearest point of complete relief off to the left here. From there, I get one club length, no closer to the hole. In here, we see it kind of bow out along the edge of the temporary water. It's not that perfect little quarter circle. Here it's saying, so anywhere within one club length of that nearest point of complete relief inside the bunker. So that's a free relief right there. And then here we have the back on the line. We have that little +1 penalty stroke. Again, spot of the original ball, flags, it creates a line, and you have to go outside the bunker here, right? You would choose, the player says, I'm going to choose this reference point, either mentally, I could say that bare area, that tuft of grass, I'm going to drop a ball and have it land and come to rest, like we talked about in Rule 14, in the relief area, and that's a one-stroke penalty. So, like we said, let's say there's part of the right side of the relief area, there's a bunker there. I could drop it in the bunker, but it has to land and come to rest in the bunker. I can also drop it in the general area, but it has to land and come to rest in the general area. Typically, I mean, it kind of makes sense. You can do that when you back it up. It's like if you're not going to take your free relief for a ball in a bunker, you're trying to get it into the grass typically. So you're going to want to have it land and come to rest in the relief area, in the general area here. So here, this is what happens 95% of the time, just outside the bunker. Maybe put a tee in the ground, drop it, land, and come to rest in the relief area. That's a one-stroke penalty. Remember, though, and this is where we get a little tied up when we have these broader rules seminars. do not mix this with an unplayable ball, right? So this is the reason I'm getting the ball out of the bunker. And again, let's just say I'm a bad bunker player. And I don't want to play out of the bunker. This back on a line relief, this is one penalty stroke. And the reason I'm allowed to get the ball in my hand here is because I have interference from an abnormal course condition. When we look at Rule 19, we can do this just for a bad lie in a bunker with no interference from an abnormal course condition for 2 strokes, right? So the reason this is 1, and again, if your ball is just in a poor lie and you need to take it out, again, that's Rule 19 unplayable ball, that's 2. The 1 comes because you have interference from an abnormal course condition. So those are very 2 similar situations, but they're different. And this is 1, that's 2. So again, a very important note. A lot of times in our general rule seminar, I don't even mention this because this is kind of rare that A, you're not going to just try to play it out of the bunker. I mean, it's free. And 2, it crosses up with this new concept, especially in 2019 rules, of taking it outside the bunker for 2 penalty strokes going back on the line. This is in this picture is very much relating to Rule 16.1 only. It's because you have interference. That's why you're getting the ball in your hand. That's why it's 1. So very, very important clarification. All right. So 16.1D, moving along. This is relief for a ball on the putting green. So if a player's ball is on the putting green and there's interference for an abnormal course condition on or off the course, and remember, like we saw very early on, if my ball is on the putting green, interference from an abnormal course condition is my line of play on or off the putting green. So I have to putt up into the fringe and there's a sprinkler head up there, and that's on my true line of play, I would be entitled to relief because I have interference based on what we saw. And it said we could place the original ball or another ball on the course, another ball on the spot of the nearest point of complete relief using the procedures for replacing them under Rule 14.2b2 and 14.2e. Again, we have interference from an abnormal course condition on the course. So it doesn't necessarily mean on the putting green. Like I said, I could be putting and a sprinkler head is in the general area. That's on the course. I get relief. Again, it's all within reason. It's reasonable relief. Kind of goes without saying. And it says also by placing the original ball or another ball. So when your ball's on the putting green, you're taking relief. And we've seen earlier where your nearest point of complete relief when it comes to the putting green or a ball on the putting green could be on the putting green or in the general area. In any case, even if you're moving into the general area, whenever you pick the ball up from the putting green, you're always going to be placing it back no matter what area of the course it's going to be in. That rarely happens, but it does happen when you take your nearest point of complete relief and it swings off the putting green. We'll see a good picture of that in a second. And it also says you can replace the original ball or another ball. So this is a specific instance to keep in mind because typically, you think when you're on the putting green, ball comes up, same ball goes down. Here, remember, when we look at putting a ball back on the spot, it's you're replacing a ball on that specific spot when you picked it up. So mark the ball, pick it up, and you're putting it back out on that spot. Here, if we've got the ball in our hand to take relief from an abnormal course condition on the putting green, we are not replacing the ball in the spot that it was picked up from. We're replacing it in a spot. So in that same line of thought, you can replace a ball back on that spot. So you're not replacing it back on a specific spot. You're picking it up and moving out of your relief, out of your interference, and placing it on that spot. So again, important thing to note, you're allowed to do it, but nobody really does this. Nobody realizes, oh, I'm going to now switch my other ball out. Usually it's just the same ball. If you're officiating, the player, I'd be shocked if they even asked if they could do that. And if they did, you say yes. But if not, they're just going to use their same ball. They're going to ask, can I clean it? Yeah, obviously, for several reasons. You're on the putting green, A, and B, you're operating under this rule so you can clean the ball when it's in your hand. But you're going to use the same ball 99 times out of 100. Goes on to say the nearest point of complete relief must be either on the putting green or in the general area, like I just said. This will be a little bit better with a picture we'll see here in a minute. So if your line of play, if it's wide enough to get you might have to be placing it off the putting green. You're not relegated to on the putting green. It's which place is near. And if there is no such point of complete relief, the player may still take this relief by using the point of maximum available relief as a reference point, which must be either on the putting green or in the general area. So this could be if the hole is surrounded by temporary water, A, probably not be playing, and if it's a tournament, we'd probably suspend in that case. If there's water literally surrounding a hole, it's not good. But if there was water surrounding a hole, you would look, where's the shallowest part where the water would interfere with. Whereas, if it's 5 inches and it goes down to 2, again, why are we playing right now? But if it goes down to 2, that's your maximum available relief right there. So this really doesn't happen. Really, it shouldn't happen, but the rules do cover it. So it's where it's most shallow. So again, great picture from the rule book here. Here's my ball. It's obviously A, on the putting green, and B, in an abnormal course condition, in this case, temporary water on the putting green. This player is left-handed apparently, so my nearest point of complete relief or my line of play, and again, it's not exactly the line, because if that were the case, the line would be cutting right over the edge of the temporary water. The line of play includes a reasonable distance on either side of the golf ball. So here it's a little bit off the where the temporary water might interfere with the line of play. Player places a ball back on that spot, plays on. If for whatever reason this area where the ball will be placed is in the general area, so the green cuts in that way, again, like we saw, the nearest point is either on the putting green or in the general area, but again, it's no closer to the hole. So you don't get to have a 20-foot putt and then you swing around and find a 10-foot putt. That's not, you still need to have that no closer to the hole concept being throughout. So again, doesn't happen that much. And again, if the hole is like right where the water is in the puddle and you're having to putt through the water to get to the hole, that's not good. And that's when maximum available relief could be used. Again, if that's the case, the horn should have been blown probably. In 16.1e, so now we're going to look for relief for a ball not found, but in or on an abnormal course condition. So this happens quite a bit. Not quite a bit. It happens a decent amount. Where do you think? If a player's ball has not been found and is known or virtually certain that the ball came to rest in or on an abnormal course condition on the course, the player may use this relief option instead of taking stroke and distance. So think about if it's really wet and there's a big puddle in the fairway, big puddle and big enough where it's deep enough and wide enough where you can't just walk through it. Sometimes puddles are small enough where you can just look through the puddle and it's right there. Imagine a puddle that's 30 feet across, 30 feet wide. You can't just walk through it and identify your ball. It's pretty deep. So there is an area of gray where, okay, there's a big area of temporary water. That's an abnormal course condition. So think of that when we're looking at this right here. So if a player's ball has not been found, it is known or virtually certain that the ball came to rest in or on an abnormal course condition on the course, so temporary water on the course, the player may use this relief option instead of taking stroke and distance relief, which is the procedure if your ball is not known or virtually certain to be lost in an abnormal course condition. You can still take stroke and distance relief. The rules always allow that if you want to take stroke and distance, that's fine. But here it's saying, okay, we'll give you free relief. Again, I've got this knowledge or virtual certainty principle and read it as saying the player's ball has not been found and it is 95% certain that the ball came to rest in or on an abnormal course condition. So there's some area of doubt, but all reasonable information would say that it is. Again, in our situation here, we've got this area of temporary water in the fairway. Let's say it's 250 yards from the tee and you hit your drive really well right down the middle, and you usually hit it on a good day 250 yards, and maybe you see it splash or maybe you don't see it splash, but you hit it right down the middle. It's over a little hill. You come over to the hill and boom, right where 250 is, there's this big area of temporary water. You look around, the rough is pretty thin. You've seen the ball, the only place it can be realistically is right here in the temporary water. We have knowledge or virtual certainty there that the ball is in the abnormal course condition, so we can use 16.1e now. Again, there's some subjectivity of, oh, someone else saw it. That's knowledge or virtual certainty. Or where else could it be? It has to be in here. We have knowledge or virtual certainty. If you don't, which we'll see, your ball's lost. The player may take relief under Rule 16.1b, C, or D. And when it says 16.1b, C, or D, it means depends on what area the course is. And if this area of temporary water is in the fairway, that's the general area, 16.1b. If it's 16.1c, if the big puddle of water is in a bunker, let's say you roll it over the back of a green and you get to the back of the green and it barely rolled over, and you look behind the green, there's a big bunker with a big puddle of water. We can be known or virtually certain that if you don't find the ball, it's in that area of temporary water. You use 16.1c, which is the bunker we just talked about, or D, that's on the putting green. If somehow you lose a golf ball on the putting green in an area of temporary water, this applies. Again, not going to happen that much, but it could. And you use the estimated point, again, where did it cross, not where, and this is important, not where the ball maybe lies. Well, maybe it's toward the back of the abnormal course condition. If you can identify your ball, then you're taking your nearest point of complete relief. But if you use the estimated point where the ball last crossed the edge of the abnormal course condition on the course as the spot of the ball for purposes of finding now the nearest point of complete relief. So in this procedure, it very much matters, did you find the ball or not find the ball? If you found the ball, then I can say, yeah, I can see my ball's right there. It's 5 feet away. Now you're using your nearest point of complete relief and you're coming out to the side maybe because you know the spot of the ball. If you don't know the spot of the ball, the rules are going to say estimate where did it last cross into the abnormal course condition. So if it's this big area of temporary water, even if it's toward the front and it's lost, again, 95% known it's in there, it last crossed toward the back. That's where your reference point is going to be in your relief areas. So it very much depends on, did you find the ball or did you not find the ball? If the ball is lost, you did not find the ball, but it's known or virtually certain. This is the bullet point you're using here. It's where did it last cross? But again, if I can see the ball or I find it, I pull it out maybe. Okay, I knew my ball was right there. I'm taking relief from that spot because I know the spot. Here, it doesn't say it, but it's inferring you don't know the spot of the ball. The same concept is what we'll see in Rule 19 when taking back on the line relief and lateral relief for an unplayable ball. So it says once the player puts another ball in play to take relief in this way. So once the player has established a reference point relief area, dropped a ball in the relief area correctly to take relief when it is known or virtually certain the ball was lost in the penalty area, the original ball is no longer in play. And this is kind of a reference to 6.3 because you've put another ball in play. It's that knowledge or virtual certainty 6. This is one of them and it says this is true even if the ball is found on the course before the end of the 3-minute search period. So 6.3b is where it's located. So if your ball is known or virtually certain to be in the temporary water, I'm going to drop a ball correctly reference point relief area because it was known or virtually certain. But let's say, the ball is found on the course because it skipped through or oh, it's in the temporary water. I can play it maybe. You put a ball in play correctly when it's known or virtually certain what happened to that ball. This ball is in play. That ball is no longer in play. Therefore, it is a wrong ball. Any strokes made with that ball, you're going to get 6.3 here, and that's not good because now you played a wrong ball and you're going to have to correct it. Or if you don't correct it and tee off further, you're going to be disqualified. So that is for loss in a temporary water. It says, but if it is not known or virtually certain, which is kind of what I just said, that the ball came to rest in the abnormal course condition and the ball is lost, the player may take stroke and distance relief. So this could be a very small area of ground under repair, and a player says, oh, it's known or virtually certain to be in here. Well, no, it's not, because we would find it if it was. Or, if you say, oh, it's a 50-50 shot, it might be in this area of GUR or temporary water. That's not knowledge of returning. That's not 95%. So if it is not 95% certain, when we see that known or virtually certain tag there, that the ball came to rest in normal course condition, this is a lost ball. You don't get to say, oh yeah, well, I hit it 300 yards away and there's a little gopher hole on the edge of the fairway and I can't find my ball and there's some thick grass and some bushes and trees, but it must have gone in this gopher hole here. That's not known or virtually certain. Your ball is lost unless you find it in the gopher hole, which you won't. But you can't assume with less than 95% certainty that the ball is anywhere in the abnormal course condition. Therefore, this bullet point in 16.1e does not apply. You're going to take in stroke and distance relief under 18.2, wherever that may have been. So last thing in 16.1 is relief must be taken from interference by a no play zone in an abnormal course condition. So here we're looking at no play zones again, and this could be, and again, when you think about this one, think about a decorative flower bed maybe near a clubhouse. That's not going to certainly paint it white, but it's, if your ball is in here, we've got a horticulturist that spends a lot of time getting these flowers to look really nice. So obviously do not take a swing out of it. We're going to say this is a no play zone and it's mandatory, and it's free, but it's mandatory. So this is what, think about that when we're looking at this one here. Again, we have a no play zone, and before we get into it, we're going to look at what that is in the definitions. Simply, it's a part of the course where the committee has prohibited play, decorative flower bed, let's say. A no play zone must be defined as part of either an abnormal course condition or a penalty area. So if we have a no play zone, it's got to be one or the other. So if we're looking at the flower bed, okay, that's going to be an abnormal course condition. Furthermore, ground under repair, maybe, let's say. A penalty area could be an NSA or ESA, environmentally sensitive area, where the government is, or a government agency is said, this is protected. We don't want you going in here and disturbing this natural area. There's a golf course surrounding it. There's a few golf courses in Colorado that are like that. I think Walnut Creek, that's a good one that's around here that's like that. Highland Meadows is like that too. Those are going to have the green top stakes. That says if your ball is in here, even if you can play it, if it's in there by this much, it's in a no play zone. You have to take penalty relief under 17.1. We're not going to spend any time on that because that is what we cover next week. So we're not going to go any farther into that. But it says the committee may use a no play zone for any reason and then end it there. But also it says, such as, here are some examples: protecting wildlife, animal habitats, or ESAs, environmentally sensitive areas. They can certainly do that and say, we don't want you going in here and traipsing around and playing a golf ball out of here. Again, we see a lot at Green Valley Ranch. That's another one that has a lot of them. If any people that do Colorado Open, ton of green stakes out there, green top stakes out there. You can use it to prevent damage to young trees, flower beds, turf nurseries, returfed areas, or other planted areas. Again, very nice flower bed maybe. Protecting players from danger. Let's say there's a no play zone and you're in Florida, there's alligators in there maybe. You can say it's a no play zone. Do not go in here because we've had issues with that. Or preserving sites of historical or cultural interest. Let's say there's a golf course and right next to it is maybe an old cemetery or or homestead or something. Another easy way is to make it out of bounds, right? Because then you can't play from there. That's easy. But if it's on the course and you still need to do it, you can make that a no play zone. I've seen that before with a cemetery on a golf course, actually, where they made it a no play zone, or should have made it a no play zone. The committee should define the edge of the no play zone with lines or stakes. So typically it's going to be painted. If it's a penalty area, and the lines or stakes, or the tops of those stakes should identify the no play zone as different than a regular abnormal course condition or penalty area that does not contain a no play zone. So that's where you'll see the red stakes or yellow stakes with green tops on them. That usually will mean, and by usually always, that's a no play zone. You can't play there. The committee needs to define it, because if it's just a red staked area and I just go in and play a ball from a no play zone, I'm going to get penalized, but there wasn't a good way to notify me, the player. That's not good. So the green stakes are a telltale sign. And if they are, typically you'll see that on the local rules of the scorecard that says the green topped areas on holes 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, are no play zones. That's good too. In 16.1F, we keep continuing to say, in each of these situations, the ball must be taken, must not be played as it lies. So this is relief must be taken from interference by no play zone in an abnormal course condition. So again, think about that decorative flower bed here. Ball is in a no play zone, you must take relief, or when a no play zone interferes the stance or swing for a ball anywhere on the course except penalty area. So here it's not a condition affecting the stroke, because that would include line of play. It's specifically, in 1 and 2, let's combine them here. It's your action area, right? It's your ball. It's a live ball, essentially, where you're going to hit from, and then stance or swing. So where would you maybe make a move or stand? So anytime your golf is, if you have to go over a no play zone, that happens a decent amount. That's fine. If your ball goes in it and your ball is in it, 16.1F1 covers that. If your stance is in it, 16.1F2 covers that, except when the ball is in the penalty area. So let's look at when the ball is in the no play zone. If the player's ball is in a no play zone, in or on an abnormal course condition, in the general area, in a bunker on the putting green, says the no play zone's in the general area, the player must take free relief under 16.1B. Another way to look at this is when we talked about, an immovable obstruction or GUR, in 16.1B, it says the player may take relief. Here, it transitions and says the player must take relief. So imagine it the same way, but if you have interference from the ball in the no play zone, it's mandatory. So it's free and mandatory when it's an abnormal course condition. The penalty areas, we're going to get into penalty structure. But no play zone in the general area. So again, balls in, this is when the ball is in the no play zone. Balls next to that really nice flower, you're not going to, take a 9-iron and obliterate that flower. They're going to say, okay, that's a no play zone. You must take a lead. This is mandatory and free GUR, essentially, is a way to look at it. And then a no play zone in a bunker, the player must, not may, must take relief or penalty relief under 16.1C1, which is the free, or 2, which is the penalty. That's that back on the line. Those are both now required procedures. You got to pick one or the other. And then a no play zone on the putting green. I've not seen this. The player must take free relief under 16.1D. So if your line of play is to the no play zone, you'd have to move that ball, another ball, along no closer to the hole where your no play zone on the putting green would not be interference. Again, not seeing that one. I don't know even a good example of that. Would love to see one actually. So anyways, so in two, now we're shifting when a no play zone interferes with stance or swing for a ball anywhere on course except in the penalty area. So 4 areas of the course here: general area, teeing, oh, not even really teeing area, general area or bunker or putting green, maybe. The teeing area, they don't really contemplate a teeing area being in or on a no play zone. So if a player's ball is outside a no play zone and is in the general area, in a bunker or on the putting green, so there we see it kind of dissected into 16.1b, .1c, .1d, and a no play zone, whether in an abnormal course condition or in a penalty area, interferes the player's area of intended stance or area of intended swing. The player must either, again, there's no may here, this is mandatory, the player must take relief if allowed under Rule 16.1b, c, or d, depending on the ball, and it kind of cascades here: general area B, bunker C, putting green D, so it matches up with the corresponding rule number there, or take an unplayable relief under Rule 19. We don't get into that here. That's Rule 19. We'll leave it there. And then for what to do when there's interference by a no play zone for a ball in the penalty area, see Rule 17.1e. That one's a little complicated. We're going to cover that one next week in Rule 17 for penalty areas. But here again, this is an abnormal course condition. So this is again when no play zones, either an abnormal course condition or it's a penalty area. This is when it's an abnormal course condition, and then it says when the no play zone is in a penalty area, maybe then see 17.1e. So this is where again your stance is on, would be on the decorative flower bed that's been defined as a no play zone. You have to take in your balls in the general area, but your stance is in the no play zone, which is also in the general area. Stance, live ball, +1 club length, mandatory drop, all in the general area. And then the penalty for playing a ball from a wrong place in breach of Rule 16.1 is the general penalty, which would mean if you were standing on that flower bed, let's say, and didn't take relief or played it out of the flower bed, that was defined as a mandatory no play zone. That's a wrong place because the rule said you must take relief. You didn't. So whenever you see must take relief, must not play the ball, typically you're going to have a wrong place following that. So, and almost always you're in the wrong place. So again, if I played out of that, not a serious breach probably, but I'm going to get 2 penalty strokes or lose the hole in match play. So, all right. So any questions right quick for 16.1, 16.2, 3, and 4? Don't take that long. We're certainly going to cover this much quicker than we covered 16.1, but any questions in 16.1 that we want to cover? And again, at the end, we'll just have it open up for anybody. Any questions so far? Maybe Ashley in the chat or anybody wants to unmute themselves. All right, easy enough. So here we're looking at 16.2. This is a dangerous animal condition. A dangerous animal condition, and highlighting the word animal, right? So let's go look at, and that's key here. Let's look at the definition again of animal. It's any living member of the animal kingdom other than humans. So if someone is acting up, on the golf course, that's not a dangerous animal condition because they're not considered an animal under the rules, including mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates. And in the context of a dangerous animal condition, I think we can all think of at least a dangerous animal that fits into a mammal, bird, reptile, amphibian, certainly, and invertebrate. So a dangerous animal condition. The reason I highlight this is that there's a interpretation in Rule 16.2 that there's no free relief from a dangerous course condition. So we're talking about animals here, not courses, not a course condition, but an animal condition. So if a player's ball comes to rest in a spot where the player has interference from a plant or bush, again, course condition, that could cause physical harm, such as poison ivy or a cactus, while the player may be faced with challenging circumstances or may even be allergic to that plant, you're not entitled to relief under the rules, right? So here it's saying even if your balls or you're standing in poison ivy, this is not free relief here. And then maybe that area was designated a no play zone. If it was in play, But on its face, especially out in the desert, we see it on TV a lot. Player hits it out by a cactus. They might wrap a towel around themselves. They can't put it on the cactus. They might wrap a towel around themselves to protect them. That's fine. You can protect the clothing, but this is specifically about an animal. So if there's a dangerous plant, which there are obviously, that is not covered here. It is basically only for animals. All right. So when relief is allowed, so it says a dangerous animal condition, and this is parentheses. So here, this is kind of saying this is an internal definition. A dangerous animal condition exists when a dangerous animal, here it's going to explain it, such as a poisonous snake. And I don't think we need to get specific. If your ball's near a snake, we'll loop this in. This is a dangerous animal condition because some people are very afraid of snakes. And you don't need to be a zoologist to say, oh, that's not poisonous. If it's a snake, let's go and take relief. Stinging bees, alligators, fire ants, or bears near a ball could cause serious physical injury to the player if he or she had to play the ball as it lies. Fire ants we don't see very much here. Bears, I think we've seen at the Broadmoor or Eisenhower down south in Colorado Springs. So that certainly exists if your ball's near a bear. These are examples. It says such as poisonous snakes. If a snake's not poisonous, it's still dangerous. I mean, a non-poisonous snake bites you. That's a dangerous animal. Anyways, so these are some examples that are most common on a golf course. Certainly alligators we see a decent amount in Florida or Louisiana. Fire ants are out there than bears. And this could be anything else that's a dangerous animal. Maybe there's a agitated goose that's near her nest, right? That could be dangerous. It is dangerous. And then it caused serious physical injury to the player if he or she had to play the ball as it lies. And then it goes on to say a player may take relief under Rule 16.2b from interference from that dangerous animal condition, no matter where his or her ball lies on the course, except that relief is not allowed. So, this can be any area of the course. If the ball's out of bounds, you're not allowed to play that ball anyways. So don't worry about that. If it's on any other area of the course, you're allowed relief here if there's a dangerous animal condition. Now, if it's obtrusive, if there's a snake like around or on the hole, we don't cover that. We'd have to get someone other to move it, but or wait till it goes away. But this is when you can extract yourself from the situation. So in playing a hole here. But it says relief is not allowed, and playing the ball as it lies is clearly unreasonable because of something other than the dangerous animal condition, such as when a player is unable to make a stroke because of where the ball lies in a bush. So again, using our example from earlier, if your ball is in a root system and you have no chance of playing it, but it's right below a beehive, you don't get out of jail and say, oh, there's a beehive, I can't play that ball. Well, you couldn't play it if the beehive wasn't there anyway, so that doesn't apply. And when interference only exists because the player chooses a club, type of stance or swing or direction of play, that is clearly unreasonable. So in the same way you might change your stance to be on a abnormal course condition, you can't also change your stance to be on or potentially on a dangerous animal condition. Not that you do that anyways, but here it's saying that that's not applicable in that case. So let's look at relief. So now that we have a dangerous animal condition, let's say your ball is near a snake. When there's interference by a dangerous animal condition, so it's near a snake, so we've determined there is interference there. The player, when the ball is anywhere except the penalty area. So now we have teeing area, general area, bunker, the putting green. So penalty area is over here right now. We're going to pencil that in for later. The player may take relief under, again, it says may, like you still could play the ball if you wanted to. You don't have to, but the player may take relief under Rule 16.1b, C, or D. Again, 16.1b, general area, bunker, or penalty, or putting green, D. So again, where does your ball lie on the golf course? It doesn't really even give anything for the teeing area here, which, and I'll be honest, I don't know how to go about that one if we had a dangerous animal on the teeing area. But in any case, if depending on where your ball is, if your ball is in the general area and you have a dangerous animal condition, you're going under 16.1b. And then if your ball is in a bunker and there's a snake by your ball in the bunker, you're 16.1c, which is dropping the ball in the bunker, or D on the putting green. So very much depends on what area of the course your ball is in. This is, again, anything except the putting green, or I guess teeing area. So again, 16.1b, relief, general area, C, bunker, D, putting green. So essentially the way to look at it, and the way to simplify this, and this really helped me to think about it when not applying this, but just knowing this rule, is treat the dangerous animal as a giant area of mandatory GUR, right? Where can you get out and drop it where there isn't interference, where you feel safe from the dangerous animal condition, right? And then 16.22, when the ball is in the penalty area. So now we're bringing this back in the penalty area to say the player may take free relief or penalty relief. For free relief, meaning you have to play inside the penalty area. Your ball is confined to whatever the penalty area is marked. Your ball's in there. You got to play it. The player may take free relief under 16.1b, except that the nearest point of complete relief, which we'll see later what that is here, and the relief area must be in the penalty area. So again, when you establish that nearest point, you can't get outside the penalty. You have to be in the penalty area when you take relief in this. It's still free potentially. So it very much depends on what kind of penalty area you got. If it's completely water, you're more than likely going to be opting into the penalty relief and just dropping out, obviously. But if it's a dry penalty area, because we can do that now and just designate, yeah, this wooded area is a penalty area, and my ball's in there, there's a snake there. Okay, I got to take relief still in that wooded area defined as a penalty area. So I've got to stay in the same area of the course for free. This is for free relief, that first one. And for penalty relief, we're just operating under Rule 17 at this point, right? So the player may take penalty relief under 17.1d and say, you know, your ball's in the penalty area. So I don't want to find a place in the penalty area that's nearest, that's not interfering, and I just want to take my relief. And then, the obvious follow-up is if there's still interference by a dangerous animal condition where the ball would be played after taking this penalty relief outside the penalty area, the player may take further relief under 1 without additional penalties. So these are kind of stacking on top of each other. So my ball, where it last crossed the penalty area. So let's not blend the rules here to say, oh, nearest point of complete relief is here, and then outside the penalty area is over here. Again, now we're operating under 17.1d. So if let's say it's a red penalty area, and here's a good example of it, right? This is a common ground here. This is a penalty area line down the whole left side, and my ball from the fairway goes into the penalty area where it crosses. The blue is my line of flight, lands here, and there's a snake there. I can take my nearest point of complete relief in the penalty area and drop it there. Or if I take penalty area relief, this does not mean that I go right where the fairway is nearest to where the ball lies. I am taking relief under Rule 17. And when we do that, where did the ball last cross the penalty area? That's whatever, 50 or so yards back. And from here, I take my relief. So you're not blending the two and saying nearest point plus outside the penalty area, and I get into the area equidistant to where my ball is from the hole. Where did it cross? So it might have crossed a long way, drop there. If there's still the dangerous animal condition, let's say, again, I'm operating under 17.1d here. I'm using the lateral relief. Well, laterally, I've got 2 club lengths to drop it in the relief area. If that is still, there's still some, snake, alligator there, I don't have to drop it and then take relief. I can, again, let's keep flowing with this. I obviously can't drop it in my relief area like I normally would. Okay, you got your reference, but then drop it where you can and feel safe. Again, still tacking on and retaining that 1 penalty stroke for taking relief from the penalty area in the first place. And again, going back to the rule, if there's still interference, we continue to take relief under 1. So now that we're outside the penalty area for 1 stroke, now we're finding where it doesn't interfere. And at the end here, and this is super important, it says for the purpose of this rule, the nearest point of complete relief, again, in the definition of that, it says it's the reference point, no closer to the hole, that avoids interference from the condition. Well, how do you select where there's no interference from the condition? And this condition is a dangerous animal. It says nearest point of complete relief means the nearest point, not near the hole, of course, where the dangerous animal condition does not exist. So that's a little subjective. So here we've got again, this is a picture I kind of drew here. We've got a alligator here. That's a dangerous animal condition, but not so for this guy. This guy doesn't seem too bothered by it. But the way to imagine that is to say, use the area around it where you would feel in danger as a giant area of essentially GUR, right? So it says the nearest point of complete relief might be on the edge of this line to say, if I were standing here, which this is a little close, we're still going to get relief. We're not going to have you hit it 10 feet from the alligator. We're going to get you out further. But essentially imagine like a giant area of GUR. The nearest point of complete relief is where the player might feel safe now, or reasonably should feel safe in playing a ball from that dangerous animal condition. Meaning if the ball were lying here already and the player said, hey, there's an alligator 50 feet that way, I'd say, well, but that's not close enough to be a dangerous animal condition. Those alligators exist. They turn into Rule 16.2, a dangerous animal condition, when they are near you or near your ball. if there's an alligator 100 yards that way in the lake, that's not a dangerous animal condition. If it comes to the shore near my ball, now it's a dangerous animal condition. So the relief will buffer off that and say, imagine it's, again, a big bubble of GUR to say, get you off of that dangerous animal condition where, again, reasonably you feel safe. I've not had this happen before, but it certainly could with the amount of alligators maybe you have in Florida. If we're here in Colorado, the snakes we have out here potentially in the summertime, I'm sure it happens a decent amount, but I've not had it happen in an event personally. So again, then the penalty structure here is if you played a ball from a wrong place in breach of rule 16.2, you're getting the general penalty, which is 2 strokes and stroke player that lost a hole in match play under 14.7a. So that is dangerous animal condition. Any questions or anything we want to unmute for that dangerous animal condition? All right. So we're going to move to embedded ball now. This is more common than the dangerous animal condition, certainly. And then the last one won't take that long. It's determining whether your ball lies in a condition from which relief is available. So in 16.3a, we have when there's relief for an embedded ball. And this is a good rule. It's got good pictures and it does a good job of showing us when it's allowed. Because when relief is allowed, a ball must be embedded in the general area. So we're isolating, it must be in the general area. So if it's embedded in a penalty area, no. If it's embedded in a bunker, that's expected sometimes, no. And then in the putting green, you don't get relief. We'll cover that, but you don't get relief for it. So the relief is allowed under Rule 16.3b only when the player's ball is embedded in the general area. We see embedded as italicized, meaning we're going to go to the definition. Because embedded is when a player's ball is in its own pitch mark, it's key, made as a result of the player's previous stroke and where part of the ball is below the level of the ground. A ball does not need to necessarily have to touch soil to be embedded. For example, grass and loose impediments may be between the ball and the soil. We'll see a good picture of that. So the way to look at this is a player's ball is in its own pitch mark. It's got to be, the pitch mark that it just created within a couple seconds. If it hit, spun, rolled back into it, that counts. If it just darts and plugs in, obviously that counts. As a result of the player's previous stroke and where part of the ball is below level of the ground. When we see level of the ground, think earth, and we'll see a picture on that, but think when it says level of the ground, think below the earth. It doesn't have to touch soil, as we see. Relief is allowed under Rule 16.3b only when the player's ball, again, embedded in the general area, right? So again, we've got this one specific area of the course here, must be the general area. And again, it doesn't define grass height. You could have an embedded ball in the rough. That happens too. Used to be the opposite. You had to have it embedded in the fairway unless a local rule expanded it to the general area. Now it's the general area. So if your ball is embedded in the rough, that still counts. We're going to start looking at sand in the general area. That exists. And where it's not allowed and where it is allowed. So again, must be in the general area here for this relief to happen. And it says there is no relief under this rule, like I mentioned, if the ball is embedded anywhere except the general area. So again, it's embedded in the bunker that's expected. Penalty area, we've got Rule 17 to cover that, or you're playing tough. It says, but if the ball is embedded on the putting green, which that happens quite a bit on a wet day, if you have a high wedge and it comes in and spins right into the green, the player may mark the spot of the ball and lift and clean the ball, repair the damage caused by the ball's impact, and replace the ball back on the original spot. Again, since we're using the original spot here, which could be a variable based on this, this is embedded in the putting green, obviously. Mark it first, pick it up. Again, putting green, you can fix all this stuff. This is damage made by this is damage to the putting green, as we covered in Rule 13. Fix it, tap it down, use your repair tool, fix it, and then put the ball back on that spot. It may not be perfect, but you're not entitled to say, oh, I'm going to move it an inch off because it's a little bumpy and I just had to fix it. No, you've got to, again, the rule saying you're going back and replacing that same ball back on that spot. There's no relief procedure as we see in the general area. It's just mark it, pick it up, fix it, put it right back down. So like we saw, it's on the putting green. That the exceptions are relief is not allowed for a ball embedded in the general area under 16.3b when the ball is embedded in sand in part of the general area that is not cut to fairway height or less. So this is an exception here that says it's not allowed when it's not cut to fairway height or less. Now, the way I look at this is cut is an action verb that has to be mown. So if you have an area off that's in the general area, but this is not a mown area, that area is not cut to fairway height or less. So here we have some courses. The one I can think about the most is in Colorado is Colorado Golf Club. There's a lot of natural sandy areas just offside of the fairways, and like here, this is, I think, is Pinehurst. See this grass here? This is not a mown area. This is not cut to fairway height or less. So if the ball embeds in normal grass in this area, that's covered by 16.3 because that's embedded in the general area. But if it's embedded in sand, and this area is not cut, again, action verb, someone is maintaining it. This area is not being cut. It's not being prepared, and it's certainly not fairway height or less. So if a ball embeds in that sandy area, you don't get relief from that. That's simply playing it as it lies. Again, it's the general area, but the embedded rule does not come into play because that area has not been actively cut and mown to fairway height or less. It's just there. Again, in that area, if there's a patch of grass and an area of earth where it goes into, again, it's talking about sand. Maybe you can infer, not even infer loose soil, but it's specifically about sand. Again, sand, there's a definition for that. It's that crushed material. Again, it's pretty clear when it's in and not in sand. So it also says when it's not allowed when interference by anything other than the ball. You've seen this throughout this rule, being embedded, makes the stroke clearly unreasonable. For example, when a player's unable to make a stroke because where the ball lies in a bush or behind a bush, maybe you can't make a stroke in it anyways, and you're not going to get out of jail just because the ball's embedded. Where if that bush wasn't there, or the ball wasn't embedded rather, you couldn't play it anyway. So you're not going to get relief if where the ball lies, you can't make a reasonable stroke at it. That's where it ends. You not get relief. Most of the time you are, but typically, if it's embedded, and there's nothing you can do with it except take it unplayable. And it happens to be embedded. Great. No, you're not getting relief for that because you couldn't play it anyways. And then 16.3.2 is whether the ball is embedded or not. So now we're going to look at some good pictures here. That's going to say, well, this is when and this is when it is not embedded. And again, it's not an exact science. And before we get there, the rules don't say how embedded it has to be. It could be 25%, it could be 50%, it could be like that ball in the putting green, it could be like 100% embedded. If it's 2% embedded, that's still embedded. If it fits this definition, it doesn't have to be a certain depth of the ball embedded. If the diameter of the ball is 1.68 inches, it doesn't have to be, it's 0.84 inches and now it's embedded. No, it could be a little embedded, and really embedded is still embedded. You still got embedded there. And again, we have to say a player's ball is embedded only if it is in its own pitch mark as made a result of the player's previous stroke. And again, own pitch mark, it's the one that it made. So if it lands in another pitch mark, it's not embedded. That's just a bad lie at this point. In the previous stroke. And part of the ball, doesn't say how much part of it is. It says part of the ball is below the level of the ground, again, surface of the earth. And if a player cannot tell for sure whether his ball or the ball is in its own pitch mark or a pitch mark made by another ball, the player may treat the ball as embedded if it is reasonable to conclude from the available information that the ball is in its own pitch mark. A little hard to, it's hard to determine, but there's a good interpretation, 16.382/1 here, that says concluding whether ball is embedded in its own pitch mark. It must be reasonable to conclude that the ball is in its own pitch mark for the player to take relief under Rule 16.3b. So we got to kind of know more than likely that the ball, this is its own pitch mark. That's a stipulation of taking relief. An example of when it is reasonable to conclude that the ball can be rested in its own pitch mark is when a player's approach shot lands on soft ground just short of the putting green in the general area. The player sees the ball bounce forward and then spin right back, and we're call it 100 yards away. The player arrives at the ball. He or she sees that the embedded ball that is embedded in the only pitch mark in the area. Since we didn't see it happen, but since it is reasonable to conclude that the ball spun back in its own pitch mark, the player may take relief under 16.3b. However, if the player's tee shot lands in the fairway and the ball bounces over a hill, we can't see it to a position where it could not be seen from the tee, but it is then found in a pitch mark, it is not reasonable to conclude that the ball is embedded in its own pitch mark and the player is not allowed to take relief under Rule 16.3. So again, you got to, I don't know if we apply knowledge or virtual certainty here, but let's look here. Yeah, it doesn't say anything about knowledge or virtual certainty, but you have to conclude if it's reasonable. And percentage-wise, I don't know what to hang on that one. But again, we have a good interpretation of when it's reasonable and not reasonable to take relief from that. Usually it's going to be pretty obvious, I think. And if it's not obvious, then like we saw here in that last paragraph, it's not reasonable to conclude that the ball is embedded its own pitch mark and the player is not allowed to take relief under 16.3b. Again, it says a ball is not embedded if it is below the level of the ground as a result of anything other than the player's previous stroke, such as when, and again, level of the ground, think earth, right? The ball is pushed into the ground by someone stepping on it, so that ball is not embedded. That ball has been moved, and it doesn't say who, but if it's, we go back to Rule 9, right? It was an outside influence, was it an opponent, was it a player? Is there a penalty? How do we fix this? That's covered back then, but it's not embedded. We know that. This is talking about embedded, and the ball is driven straight down into the ground without becoming airborne. So if you just drill the ball right down and nail it in, it's not airborne. It didn't make a new pitch mark, right? And the ball was dropped and taking relief. Now that we drop it from knee height, this is less likely to happen, but on a muddy day, on a bare area, if you drop it, it could splat in, and let's say the ball is below the level of the earth, it's not embedded under the rules because it wasn't made from the previous stroke. That sounds obvious, but there's 3 good examples here of when it could be the other way, and you're not entitled to relief. When you drop it from knee height, ball plugs in your relief area, you're playing it there. All right, so again, here's a good picture from the rules. This is the first one. The ball is embedded. It's below the level of the ground, the level of the earth, in its own pitch mark. And here, again, it's embedded because it's below, again, think the level of the ground. There's that level running right through, and we've got a dip in there, but we still have that, we still maintain that level of the earth. That ball is embedded. And the last one, the ball is nestled down, it's sitting in the grass. It's not embedded because it's not below the level of the earth, right? So we look for relief for an embedded ball in 16.3b, but a player's ball is embedded in the general area and relief is allowed under 16.3a, everything we've just covered. So we've established, yes, this ball is embedded in the general area. The player may take free relief. Again, you can play it by dropping the original ball or another ball in the relief area. Again, we can use another ball. We don't have to use the same ball. Typically we will, but you can use another ball because now that we're operating under 14.3, you're allowed to change out the golf ball if you want to when taking relief each time you drop or place under this rule. Again, typically you're just going to pick up the ball, clean it, and use that same ball. But the reference point, again, whenever we have a relief area under 14.3, we're going to establish reference points, and then that relief area is going to tail on after that reference point. It's hinged to that reference point. So the reference point is the spot right behind where the ball is embedded. So again, this doesn't say it's in the general area, it's the spot. So the ball is embedded in the general area, and right behind it is a penalty area line. That's still the spot right behind the ball. However, the relief area is going to be in the general area, which we'll see. And the size of the relief area measured from the reference point is 1 club length, but you have these limits. So the spot right behind it. And I think the reason they're doing that is that's how it used to be. You had to drop it as near as close to the spot behind the ball. If the ball is embedded, the spot behind the ball is almost by default the nearest point of complete relief, no closer to the hole. Obviously, that is not embedded anymore. That once you go right behind the ball, now we've transitioned from embedded ball to not embedded ball. So it's the spot right behind it, and you get 1 club length, so 43 inches with these limits. It must be in the general area. So again, your ball is in the general area, therefore your relief area must be. But interestingly, your reference point, it doesn't say your ball must be, the reference point must be in the relief area. The relief area, or the reference point, is the spot right behind the ball, and from there we have to drop it in the general area. So it gets a little tricky in a minute when we look at a bunker here. And it must not be nearer the hole than that reference point. So we get this question all the time, and it doesn't happen that much, but we still get it a lot about what if a ball is embedded and when you have, a bunker and there's that stack, that little layer of earth, right? That little icing on the cake, or let's say you drill one into there. We saw in Rule 12, that little area that's not sand, right, is not part of the bunker. That's part of the general area. So what if your ball is plugged into that? And there's a clarification here that says you're not always allowed to take embedded relief. So the rules outline when embedded relief is allowed, not if you're able to take it. So if these situations exist, then yes, you can take it. Your ball is in the general area and you have general area behind you to drop the ball, then you are allowed to take it. Doesn't guarantee you're automatically allowed to take it. So you're not allowed to take embedded ball relief if the player's ball is embedded in the general area, but neither the reference point or any part of the course within 1 club length of the reference point is in the general area, the player is not allowed to take free relief under Rule 16.3b. So you're very much tethered to spot of the ball, spot behind it, reference point, in 1 club length. You don't get a nearest point of complete relief. Whereas if you're on a cart path and just the way it's laid out where the hole is, that might bump you out 20 feet in the other direction, but that is your nearest point of complete relief compared to maybe 30 in that direction. So in that case, it's your nearest point. It doesn't contemplate the difference or the distance. You're very much tethered to embedded ball. You get 1 club length. If you don't have any relief options in there, you can't drop it. So if the ball, like we see here, if the area behind it plus that 1 club length is in a bunker, you have to drop the ball in the relief area to take relief under 16.3b correctly. So if you can't do that and you dropped it in there, you've dropped it in an area of the course not allowed to, and now you're playing from the wrong place, which this says. It says, for example, free relief is not allowed if a ball is embedded at the very base of the lip, wall, or face of a bunker. So think of that, again, that icing on the cake there, that area of the bunker that's not a bunker, but is the general area. So it is embedded in the general area. So step 1's there. The spot right behind the ball is in the bunker. Okay, that's still fine because it doesn't have to be in the general area. The reference point doesn't have to be. And then anything within 1 club length of and not near the hole from that reference point, there's no part of the relief area that is in the general area. So the ball is embedded in the side of the bunker, reference points in the bunker, that's fine. And then that 1 club length doesn't get you out of the bunker, then you're not entitled to relief. In this case, you're either going to play it as it lies or take an unplayable, in which case you could drop it in the bunker for 1 penalty stroke because you're going back on the line for a ball in the general area. You can use any area of the course. You get into that in Rule 19, or even behind the bunker because that's still the general area. You can still drop it in there for 1 penalty stroke. So again, doesn't always entitle you to relief. So here, again, very good picture. Ball's embedded here, direction of play. That's the spot right behind the ball where it's embedded. Doesn't matter what area of the course it is, but when we get to the general area or the relief area, that must be in the general area. So if this is embedded right on the lip of a bunker, again, general area, but here, this is all taking place in the bunker, you're not entitled to free relief under 16.3b. You're going to have to use, and more all likely, Rule 19 for unplayable ball. So again, we get that question a lot. Every time I always ask, hey, show of hands, how many times does this happen to anybody? 1 person maybe raises their hand. So it doesn't happen, but people think about it. And the USGA, RNA said, well, let's make a clarification about that. Exactly. All right. So our last thing is 16.4. This segues nicely coming out of 16.3. And it says if a player reasonably believes that his or her ball lies in a condition where free relief is allowed under 15.2, which is immovable obstruction, 16.1, which is that abnormal course condition, or 16.3, which is the embedded ball, but can't decide without lifting the ball. So under 16.1, that could be, if your ball is lying and you think there's a sprinkler head right underneath it or right next to it, but you can't see without the ball being in the way, you can mark it, pick it up. Yes, there's relief, or nope, there's nothing there. I just imagine it, put it back. This is what covers that. So it's these 3 specific rules where before you play the ball, maybe hurt yourself by hitting a sprinkler head. If you can't tell, mark it, pick it up. That's a sprinkler head, take relief, or oh, that's not, put it back, keep going. You're allowed to do it if it's reasonable to pick your ball up. Reasonably believes that your ball is in a condition where free relief is allowed under these rules. The player may lift the ball to see if relief is allowed, but the spot of the ball must be first marked, and the lifted ball must not be clean at all, except when you're on the putting green. So again, you mark it, pick it up, pinch it maybe, look in there, set it off to the side, put it back. We saw this with maybe Patrick Reed for the embedded ball thing, right? Where his ball was embedded, maybe. He says it was, which we take the player's word for it. And he marked it, picked up, didn't clean it, put it off to the side, because if the ball wasn't embedded and the rules official said, I don't think this ball is embedded, he'd have to not be able to clean it, put it back without having cleaned it, and put it back in its position. So in this case, you're not allowed to clean the ball at all, because if relief isn't allowed, then you've just picked up a ball and cleaned it. You're going to get penalized for that, and that's what it says next. It says if the player lifts the ball without having this reasonable belief, except on the putting green, you get the penalty stroke, right? So if your ball, it's not reasonably embedded, but you wanted to pick it up anyways and check to maybe get a better lie, then the rules going to say there wasn't reasonable enough belief to pick it up, you're penalized a stroke. Or if relief is allowed and the player takes relief, there's no penalty, even if the player did not mark the spot of the ball before cleaning or lifting or cleaning the ball. So if you just you forgot and didn't mark it, say, oh, is it embedded? And you just picked it up. Oh, it happened to be embedded. Well, you kind of get a get out of jail free card because you're entitled to relief. So as soon as the ball is embedded in the general area, you are now in the 16.3b area. We're entitled to relief. You can pick it up. Oh, I didn't mark it. That's okay. You don't have to do that. So this is kind of saying, if you didn't mark it and do correct or clicked or cleaned it, you're going to get relief anyway. So you're not going to get penalized for not doing it correctly. The penalty would come as if you weren't allowed relief. That ball is not embedded, but you didn't mark it, or you did pick it up and clean it. You're getting that one penalty stroke there. And it says if relief is not allowed. So meaning if I mark my ball, pick it up, that's not embedded, I put it back. Or if it is embedded and I choose not to take relief, the player gets a 1-stroke penalty if he or she did not mark the spot of the ball before lifting it or cleaned the lifted ball when not allowed. So if I just picked it up and cleaned it and said, oh, that's not embedded, I've just picked up my ball in the rough or the fairway for no reason and cleaned it. Well, the default is going to kick in where you can't do that. So, even though the rules allow you to check for it, you have to do it the right way. You can't just pick it up and do it. You have to mark it, pick it up, not clean it, not embedded, put it back, play on. So when you get your hands on the ball here, you got to mark it. And if you don't, if relief is allowed, then you got off the hook there. But if relief wasn't allowed, you just picked up your ball or cleaned it when you weren't allowed to for no reason. Even though you're allowed to pick it up maybe because it was reasonable to believe it was embedded, and now it's not. Okay, now we got to follow it back and again put the ball back in the lie we had, recreate the lie in rule 14, whether it was sand or not sand, and move on from there. We see the ball must be replaced in the spot under rule 14.2. And then lastly, the general penalty. You get the penalty for playing an incorrectly substituted ball or playing a ball from a wrong place in breach of a rule. You get the general penalty under rule 6.3b, which is substitution, or 14.7a, which is a wrong ball. And then if multiple rule breaches apply, result from a single or related act, C1.3, C4, which is if I don't mark it and pick it up and clean it, I've done 2 procedural things that are 1-stroke penalties on their own, but combined in the single motion, it's a 1-stroke penalty, and I'm putting it back. So that's where that kind of follows up and cleans that up. It mentions that in the rule, but it doesn't reference it. The marking and cleaning at the same time, although 1-stroke, that's the 1 + 1 = 1 situation. So
look at you.
That's it. So if we have any questions on any of the rule or anything we just covered, we can unmute, or Ashley, if you're still there, if we have anything in the chat, we can go ahead and talk about that. But that's all I got. So any questions on anything that we covered there?
Todd, I'm not sure if your question got answered there in the embedded ball section, but if not, why don't you go ahead and unmute and ask your question if you can.
Oh, thank you. Freaking meeting is still going on.
Yeah. Any other questions or anything? All right. Well, this one was a long one, so thank you for hanging out. We'll put it on the website here. Next week, we're going to cover Rule 17. That's penalty areas. So just as applicable, we got a lot of those on the golf courses out here. So we'll tune in for that. Don't think it'll be as long as this one, but will still be a good one. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email's on our website, but it's rduke@coloradogolf.org. And yeah, thanks for joining in again, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.